IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That dude, you know who that is, right? That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are back for another edition of Talking Notre Dame Football. And Ryan, we're kind of going through a little bit of an off-season overview of each position and sort of a state of the union type of thing. And we did kind of big picture offense and defense and the team, and now we're kind of going through each position, and we're rotating offense and defense. And today we're going to talk about the wide receiver position because I'll be honest with you, Ryan, the intriguing thing about this position is that for a reason that probably we should not have is I have a great deal of confidence in this group going into next season, and I have a great deal of optimism about this group going into the next season. But when you really sit and think about it, there's really no reason to have that confidence other than just potential. I think that's the big thing here is, look, we know the O-line's got to play great. We know the quarterback's got to play great, but it can't just be them, right? The receivers have to step up, especially in big games. And how good this offense is going to be, it's going to be partly determined. And a good part, like a significant part, is how much or how quickly or to what degree can this receiving core go from the potential that we're going to discuss to proven production. And right now, almost exclusively, this room is about potential. Even a player like Caleb Smith who transferred in, it's still about potential because you're projecting what will he do with a better quarterback and a better system and things along those lines. And so that's going to be the big thing this offseason, right? And then moving forward is, do they have the pieces in place, coaching-wise, system-wise, and personnel-wise, to take it from a group that, yes, they get a lot of highly ranked kids. There's other than O-line, there might not be a position on the offensive side of the ball that has more highly ranked recruits for those who are the star worshipers. This group, if you're someone who believes in that, should be absolutely outstanding this season because it's nothing but 4-star players from top to bottom and several top 100 players. But it's still about potential and how quickly, Ryan, can it get to production. And then we're going to find out, too, what role did the quarterback play, maybe, if any, in the group not reaching expectations in 2022? Because there's going to be no excuses for the receivers in 2023, Ryan. And so that's what really makes this conversation fascinating is a level of confidence that I have. I don't know about you. I'm not speaking for you. I'm talking about me, that I have, because we haven't discussed it, in this group where when you sit and think about it, you're like, yeah, I really should probably be a little bit more skeptical of this group than I am based on what they've accomplished. And that's what makes this conversation to me fascinating.
I feel like we talk about margin for error a lot. And I mean, this is a group where I think you feel confident about it because not only is there a lot of talent in the room, like you kind of talked about, there's also a lot more bodies than what they've had over the last couple of years. You know, I mean, we're a year removed from going into last spring where it's like if Notre Dame has one injury, it's like, you know, sound the alarm. Like, this is not great. You know, there's just not enough bodies in the room. And now you're looking and it's like you have all the returnees, you bringing in Caleb Smith, you're bringing in a 4-man 2023 class. There's a lot of potential and a lot of talent, but also there's numbers, right? And usually when you have 9-10 wide receivers that are as talented as what Notre Dame has, usually a few of them are going to pan out, right? Even if 3 or 4 maybe aren't ready for prime time or don't take the necessary step, you still have a plethora of other talented options that are on the table for potentially being what Notre Dame needs in order to be that type of upper echelon team. And I think that that's probably what gives you the biggest optimism, Brian, is that like there's options, there's numbers,
There's
which is
talent.
great.
It's just talent across, or just let's just say physical talent across the board. I mean, you mentioned, there's 9 scholarship players of guys who came into Notre Dame as scholarship players, right? And then number 10 is Matt Salerno. So you have obviously Caleb Smith, the transfer. You have Matt Salerno. You have the 3 players from the 2021 class: Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas. That gives you 5. You have 6 in Tobias Merriweather, and you have the 4 incoming freshmen. It's a very healthy number.
Yes.
I think 12 is probably the ideal, like, max number you want to have. So they're getting much closer to that. But as you said, there's a ton of – if a guy goes down here, you mentioned it this year. You know, Notre Dame couldn't afford to have an injury this year. Well, then they ended up having 2.
Yeah.
You know, and the only 2 veterans, like 2 of the 3 veterans that they had on this roster this year, both went down with season-ending injuries at one point in time. Not season-ending injuries, significant injuries. And then obviously Joe Wilkins Jr.'s injury kept him from really working up the depth chart, and then he ultimately transferred. Mm-hmm. And then obviously Avery Davis, as we know, was lost for the season. So you look at it, and Ryan, you say, that's the one thing you couldn't have. And then not only did you have it, but you had it in your veteran group. You had it in your leadership core. Right. And I think that factored into why this group, in my opinion, didn't really thrive in 2022. It's one of the reasons they didn't thrive in 2022. But the other part is because some guys just didn't play to their potential. Well, then you talk about injuries too. Deion Colsey started the year banged up. And then Tobias Merriweather ended the year banged up for a lot of parts. So it just was a very unhealthy group. And as you mentioned, once you started that happen, it was like, okay, you just don't have the bodies to field a competent receiving core depth-wise. Well, now you're in a situation where you could have 4 injuries and you still have 5 really good football players ready to go.
Yes.
And you just there's just less, there's more, like you said, more margin for error. And they all can play. Now you start getting to the point where if some of those injuries are veterans, you're forced to play some younger guys that maybe might not be ready. Maybe. But this is one of those things where if you're Chancey Stuckey and you're Tommy Rees, it's like, hey, no more of this. You can't play until you know the whole offense stuff.
Right.
You got to find a way to, okay, whatever the situation is, if Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James or Caleb Smith, the freshman Caleb Smith, that's just going to get super confusing. I mean,
someone needs a nickname. I think they call Caleb
we'll just
Smith
call him Young.
Well, I think they call the freshman coming in KK. I think I've seen a bunch of times.
I'm not calling him KK. We'll call him Young Caleb. How about that, right?
How about Double K? Double K better?
No, we'll go with Young Caleb, right? So if you can call him whatever you want. I'm not
K
calling
squared.
him KK.
Got it. Yep.
I can't do it. So if you go with Young Caleb, and then obviously Rico Flores, if you don't have a package going into every game that those kids can execute if they're needed, then you're not doing this right. And those are the things you look at and say, boy, they're just a much greater margin for error. However, within that margin for error, at some point in time, these guys got to start stepping up and playing better. Yep. Last year, there was all the excuses in the world last year, and we'll for the sake of argument, Ryan, we'll grant them. Quarterback play was a problem. Your depth was a problem. The system had to change to fit the quarterback and the personnel, which is more tight end, running back. We'll grant all those for the sake of argument, okay? Just to say, okay, it's just for the sake of moving on from last season, okay? Moving on, fine. It is what it is. Those aren't issues now, though. You have plenty of talent and depth at quarterback now. You're not a tight end dominant team going into 2023. Your offensive line is far more prepared, and you should have an offense that's going to be much different. And now your young guys from last year, in a lot of ways, are not young anymore. Juniors. Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Jane Thomas, they're all juniors now. They've all played a lot of snaps.
Yep.
Lorenzo has what's he over? He's over 40, 50. He's over 50 now career catches, correct? Didn't he have like 20 as a freshman? And then he had over 30 this year, I believe. So he's in a situation where he's no longer, he's got 54 career catches at this point in time for over almost 700 yards. Jaden Thomas last year played a ton of snaps, caught 25 passes. Deion Colsey didn't catch a lot of balls, but he caught some clutch passes in some big games. And he's got now 9 career catches. He's now been in the rotation to some degree for now 2 years. Those guys are veterans now. Then he started acting like it. He started playing like it, all of them. Tobias Merriweather kind of went through his freshman ups and downs. You're a sophomore now. You've got some snaps under your belt. It's time to step up and play. And then, of course, Caleb Smith, the elder, is obviously played a lot of football at Virginia Tech. Hasn't caught a ton of passes, but he's probably getting close to about 1,000 yards in his career, I believe, Ryan, at this point in time. So
he had 600 something last year, right? Just last year.
I think he only had like two or 300 the year before. He's getting close to it. Let me just pull it up here real quick. Yeah, he's just over 1,000. So he has 1,143 yards in his career, 74 catches and 7 touchdowns. So, he hasn't ever had like a year where he's had to be the guy. I mean, he was kind of the guy last year, but their guy last year, because their pass game was so bad, had 600 some receiving yards. It was just not a very good passing offense, if we're going to be honest. And then the next highest number on that offense was 256. So it was a problem. So Ryan, you look at it and say, there's the talent there. Guys are older now, but there's a lot of roles that have to be stepped into that guys have not shown that they can do. Right? Lorenzo Styles, all the talent in the world. It's got to show that he can be that guy. Deion Colsey flashed that potential, but can he be a starter? We don't know. Tobias Merriweather, all the talent in the world, caught one pass last year. We can blame it on whoever we want, but the fact is now it's time for him to show, hey, I'm this guy. Let's go play ball. Because we know the staff's going to give him those chances to do it, right? And so now it's time to step into it and continue to develop. And then, of course, there's the freshmen and all that. So now it kind of comes into, okay, now we're going to learn a lot about Chancey Stuckey.
Yes.
Here's what I mean. Last year, Chancey Stuckey was starting, honestly, with a net negative from a coaching standpoint, if we're going to be honest. There were some really bad habits that these kids had that he had to break. And there was a lot of fundamental stuff that he had to install that was not installed. Normally, when you walk into a receiver room like Notre Dame's, the talent they have, there's a foundation that's been established. And so that's the baseline. What I mean in net negative is there was not a foundation established, and some of the things that had been established were very bad habits. So that's why I say net negative. So he had to get him back up to just the foundation and then get him beyond. And he did that. But a lot of the stuff that they started to show late in the year, Ryan, was the basics that they were lacking. It was not next level stuff. Now the question, so we know that Coach Stuckey can break the bad habits and start building into some of the, the basic stuff, right? Which is, it's kind of sad that we're saying that. That's not a knock on Chancey Stuckey. That's a knock on who was there before. So he built some of the foundational stuff, like knowing how to get off of a press. We were like praising that last year at the end of the year. And it's so sad that we had to praise that. That should just be assumed, but different story for a different day. Now we've got to find out, Ryan, two things about Chancey Stuckey. Number one, can you recruit to Notre Dame when you have to start fresh at Notre Dame, right? Meaning last year's receiving core was guys that you had already established a very long relationship with at another place. And you did a great job. I expect him to do it, but it's still, he's got 1 year does not define you as a coach, as a recruiter. Like, we're not heaping praises on Mike Mickens because of how good the Benjamin Morris and Jaden Mickey class was. I liked the first class he had, especially considering he couldn't go on the road and recruit with Philip Riley, was a 4-star, Ryan Barnes, who I liked, Chance Tucker, who I liked. And then you come into the next year, and then you do Mickens and Morrissey, or Mickey and Morrissey. Then you combine that with Gray and Bell. So it's the consecutive recruiting that has stood out. Coach Stuckey now has to show that he can do that. So those are the twofold things that he'll need to do. We'll get into the second part later when we look at the future of the position. But right now, this is a big offseason for him because he now has to show that he can take these guys to another level, and he has to show that he can do something that Mike Mickens had to do at one time in his career, which is take a guy whose head was not in the right place, in Tariq Bracy, and get him in the right place. I'll just say it. Lorenzo Styles' head and attitude was not in the right place last year. He did not have a good attitude. He was not a good teammate, and I've heard this from many sources. He is not a guy that was playing the game the right way, with the right effort, the right urgency, the right focus, and his play suffered because of it. And can he get that kid's head where he needs to be? That's going to be a challenge for him. And if not, can you then say, okay, step aside then and get somebody else in there? Which is not an easy task because there's a chance that means you might lose him, right? That's a big test for him, the Lorenzo Styles test, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But then also, can you take all those different types of receivers you have, because Lorenzo needs to be coached a lot differently than Deion, who's going to be coached differently to Tobias, and so forth and so on. Can you now start adding some sort of second-level classes onto their list, right? You've taught the basics. Good for you. Good job. That's something that's been lacking for years, but can you take it to the next level? Mentally and physically, that's something that Chancey Stuckey still has to prove because he just hasn't had to do it. He was at Baylor for 1 year. He's been in Notre Dame for 1 year. He's never been somewhere 2 years in a row where you could see what's that next level job of coaching that you're going to be able to do this year.
Sure. Well, and I think that's a great point too, because that was one of the other reasons where I was going to kind of say that I feel optimistic about this wide receiver unit is because there is a lot of diversity to the skill sets that they have. Like, this isn't, if you had 9 or 10 guys, let's say, that all just fit into 1 or 2 spots, you would still like the talent, but at the end of the day, it doesn't fit incredibly well together, right? Because you can't get all those players on the field and mix and match the different skill sets that they have. When you're Notre Dame now, you look and you say, I have my towers outside that I can go to. I have guys that I can put in the slot. I can bring a little bit more of a sleek, explosive slot in a Lorenzo Styles, or I can throw a Jaden Thomas out there who's a big body slot. Or if I want to bring in a young kid like a Caleb Smith, that is more of the traditional slot, I can do that as well. I have guys that can play 2 different positions. I have a couple guys that maybe could even play all 3 different positions in Notre Dame's offense. So you have diversity of skill set, which is great in a vacuum, right? It's awesome because there's so many possibilities. But to your point, and we talked about this with Tommy Rees, coaching quarterbacks, right? You are still coaching players that are different and are going to win differently, and they have to win differently, right? The way that Deion Colsey wins is going to be a lot different than what KK Smith, how he wins in the slot, right? Like they're going to be much different as far as how they attack leverage, how they attack blind spots, how they run routes, because they're different body types, getting in and out of breaks, sinking the hips. Some are going to be more natural, some are not going to be. So those things are very interesting, and I agree that that second year is usually where you see that massive step taken, or lack thereof, right? If there's a bigger point that you can reach, or if you kind of hit a little bit of a plateau. And I think that for me, everything I've heard, I'd like to think that, and I believe that Chancey Stuckey is going to take this unit to a much higher level in year 2 than comparative to year 1. And if I backtrack real quick to recruiting too, Brian, I will say this, man, because it's a fair point, and we've talked about it a lot, and I know people on the board have talked about it, and it is reasonable, right? He gets here, Chancey Stuckey already had relationships with Jaden Greathouse. He already had relationships with Braylon James, right? So it's easier to recruit those guys because he had already been building relationships and bring them to Notre Dame. You're starting from a little bit more of a baseline, of a flat floor there. But you want to add something real quick?
Yeah, I do, because you're making a good point. But I want to point out, too, is there was a stigma that went with him when he went from Baylor to Notre Dame that I think helped him with those guys.
No doubt.
They really liked him, but he was a Baylor. I'm not going to Baylor. Oh,
right.
Wow, he's at Notre Dame now. And there was that boost I think you got. Yes. Now in year 2, however, it's starting from scratch. It's building those relationships, and it's just different at Notre Dame. And this isn't us saying he can't do it. It's just saying he has to prove that he can do it. The point being, there were kids in his home state that he could go out and see often that he was able to go get. Well, you can't do that with Micah Hudson the way you could with Jalen Greathouse.
Exactly.
Right? You can't do that with Bredo Richardson the way that you could with Braylon James, and so forth and so on. And that's going to be the key. Again, it's not saying he can't do it. It's just, look, with anything, one great year doesn't mean that you're success, right? Ed Orgeron won a national championship. Does that mean he's a great coach? No. It means he had a great year, right? But otherwise, he was a pretty mediocre coach most of the time, right? And so it's about the consistency. And can you do it year after year after year? And it's important because it's needed also to restock the depth chart because of the issues that did exist.
No doubt.
And that's kind of where I'm coming from when I say it's still a question mark. It's not that we're doubting he can do it. He's already off to a pretty darn good start in his class with Cam Williams, right?
It's a really good start.
It's just, okay, now it's time to take it to that next level. And that's what he needs to see from a recruiting standpoint. But the coaching standpoint is the one, Ryan, to me, that's an even bigger question mark. Like the recruiting thing, I kind of feel like he's going to be fine there. And he's going to have help. Tom Maurice, Marcus Freeman, Chad Bowden, all those guys. The coaching one to me is the bigger question mark. Because honestly, if that's good, the other part somewhat takes care of itself, in my opinion. If the coaching part is good, the receiver part, the recruiting part will be much easier to do.
Yeah. Well, and I do, from the recruiting side, I still do want to see because it is fair, right? Because you had, out of a 4-man class, Chancey Stuckey got 3 players from the state of Texas, 2s that you had deep relationships with, and then 1, Caleb Smith, that was a little bit more of a late riser from the recruiting ranking perspective, right? So I want to see him, though, be able to get a player like Ryan Wingo from Missouri or Jeremiah McClellan, or touch into the state of Florida, touch some of these other regions, and be able to show that, the recruiting prowess extends past the Texas baseline that you had to begin with. Like, I want to see him be able to go into different areas and forecast that in the right way. And I think that from everything I've heard from players that are on the board and just kind of their opinions of Coach Stuckey, I think that his recruiting is going to be very good, and I think that it's going to continue to ascend. But, I mean, to your main point, Brian, this is a case study right now, year 2 for Chancey Stuckey, because to your point, we have never seen a year 2 of Chancey Stuckey at a place coaching. Like, you just literally haven't seen it, right? And at the end of the day, the room is more talented, which gives us more optimism, higher upside. But this is also, there's also pressure there, right? Because if you look at it and if you leave 2023 and it's like Tobias Merriweather didn't make the jump, Deion Coles didn't make the jump, then you're like, well, why didn't they make the jump, right? And at the baseline, you're going to look at the coach. And I do think that Chancey Stuckey is going to be able to get the most out of these guys. But at the end of the day, the results are what happens every Saturday. And you want to see those things. And, you know, he went to Baylor in his 1 year and he made Tyquan Thornton a second-round pick, right? It was a modest player that was able to really turn it on and become a really high playmaker. RJ Sneed was a player that had a big improvement under him in his 1 year at Baylor. But until you see that second year under Coach Stuckey, you don't know what it looks like, right? You can still be optimistic. You can still be very, you know, you could look forward to the fruits of the labor and what he's going to be able to do, because I think the world of him. I think that he's going to do a very good job. I think that the talent in the room is going to take a huge step forward. But until you see that year 2, you can't tell me you tangibly know what to expect from Chancey Stuckey in year 2. You always talked about Harry Hiestand, right? Like year 3 under Harry Hiestand, you know what's happening, right? Like, because there's a track record. You've seen
with
it.
many players over years, right?
Exactly.
Right. So, I mean, look, we could sit there and say, no, I'm confident he's going to do it. And that's where some of my optimism comes from. There's a level of confidence that Chancey Stuckey is going to get him there, but I still need to see it. And that's kind of where I say, like, I'm just telling y'all now, I'm going to sound very confident in the receiving corps from here until the season. And it's an optimism kind of built on faith in the talent, or recognition of the talent, faith in the coaching that they're going to receive from Chancey Stuckey. It's going to at least be solid, and solid's good, a receiver. It's not great, but it's at least good. It's at least going to be solid. And then it's also a confidence in that I think that the system and the fact is going to benefit them, because they're going to finally have a quarterback that can get them the football. Whether it's, you know, Sam Hartman or Tyler Buckner. Because Tyler Buckner is going to be a better player next year than he was early in 2022. Whether that's good enough to be the starter, we'll find out. But the quarterback play is going to be there. The line's going to be better than it was for the first half of last year. And these players are all older. But at the same time, please understand, because I don't want to have to say this every time I say something positive about the quarterbacks, it's very much a show me season for a lot of these guys. Coaching wise and player wise. And they still have to show it. So I'm optimistic it's going to be good, but they need to prove it. You know, like somebody was complaining, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was complaining about how, you know, the Notre Dame receivers aren't getting enough love, preseason love. And I'm like, well, why should they?
Right.
I mean, what have they done to prove that? I mean, we have one game from Lorenzo Styles, and, you know, we're all talking about how good we thought Deion Colsey was, and he had 9 catches last year. So if you're not someone who watches Notre Dame every game, what about his 9 catches from 192 yards makes you think that people should be talking about how he's going to be the next Miles Boykin breakout, or the next Chase Claypool, or the next Michael Floyd? There's no evidence of that. We all know Tobias Merriweather was a very talented kid, but he caught 1 pass last year. So, like, from an outsider standpoint, why should they think that about the receiving corps? And it's fair. It's fair. And now it's time for them to show it. And the spring is going to be a really, really interesting part of that. It's going to be a very interesting part of that. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this group develops.
And they get to go against a pretty talented cornerback group for Notre Dame every single day in practice, which I think will also be a big opportunity. You know, it's going to go against guys like Benjamin Morrison. I know Cam Hart will obviously probably be limited, but to go against guys, Christian Gray coming in, Jaden Mickey, Ryan Barnes, Chance Tucker, Notre Dame, I mean, they're going to have to bring it every day, right? Because all of a sudden Mike Mickens has gotten that unit to a level where you're deep and you have good talent, obviously all the way around. So
Thomas
I mean,
Harper as well for the slot guys.
Yeah, I mean, so you better bring your lunch pill every day for the outside receivers who are going to go against Benjamin Morrison every day in practice, right?
Sure.
The Thomas Harper's, playing in the slot. Like you better be ready to play, or else they're going to take your lunch money.
Well, that's the kind of the thing for Deion Colzie specifically too, and I think that's a great point, Ryan. Is it's important. We talk about this with the line, right? We talk about this all the time with the offensive line. Well, we're confident the defensive line is at least going to be physically ready to play because they're going to have to battle Harry Hiestan's offensive line every day.
Yes.
Well, the same is true on the other side of the ball. And I'll be honest with you, I've been told this by several people. There was a lot of complaints in the past from the people on the defensive side of the ball about the receiving core because they weren't giving them a good look. Because they were thinking, boy, we're pretty good because we're shutting these guys down. And then they get to games and they're like, some simple basic press release moves were burning them because they weren't seeing it. They weren't. Yeah. It's just not something they win against in practice. They were just able to kind of come out and jam guys and just whoop their butts. And then come out of the year like, wow, these guys are doing these moves and we're not prepared for it. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. And last year started to change, which is a good thing. But it's true at the skill positions as well. The better the receivers play, the better it is for the corners. And the better the corners play, the better it is for the receivers. So we talk about like a Deion Colzie and a guy like that. Well, they're going to be going against Benjamin Morrison every day, as you mentioned. And if you're going to be successful and win a starting job and prove yourself, you're going to have to do it against a pretty good football player. And then if they can have some success doing that, then it's going to make Benjamin Morrison a better football player. And those are the reasons that you feel that there's a level of optimism, Ryan, because if we're out there in the spring and we're seeing these guys making plays, it's like, okay, they're doing it against some guys who can play, in some instances, right? But that it's going to be interesting. It's going to see how it develops because look, we'll kind of transition to the next thing is because, and that's part of the thing that you brought up, Brian, is, the next part of this is who steps up. Look, somebody's going to start. Somebody's going to be the leading receiver. Is it because that guy steps up and is the guy, or is it because it's just Navy has a leading receiver, Army has a leading receiver, Air Force has a leading receiver? Just because someone leads the team in receptions doesn't mean that person's an impact player. Somebody will inherently have to lead the team in receptions.
Does someone take that mantle, or are you best by defaults? Like that?
Bingo. Just like a starting lineup. 11 dudes are going to start on both sides of the ball next year. I guarantee it. Right? But are you starting because somebody's got to play it? Or are you starting it because, well, of the bad options we have, he was the best.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a big question mark. So Ryan, as we look into this offseason, who steps up? And I think that's why it's really good that Notre Dame does have not just all the returners, but everybody except young Caleb Smith is going to be on the roster this spring. Jaden Greathouse is there this spring. Braylon James is there this spring. Rico Flores is there this spring. So you're going to have numbers, but you're going to have people pushing you from day one. And that's going to make it fascinating because they need people to step up. And it's not just one guy. They can't just have one guy emerge as the guy. We're not even having the alpha conversation. We'll have that as we get closer to the season. We're having the conversation about who steps up and takes hold of this room as, hey, even in spring ball, we get into a 7-on-7 because, as you know, Marcus Freeman makes everything a competition. Every 7-on-7 is a competition. Every team period is a competition. There's going to be some level of competition built into all these things. Hey, we need to make a play here to win this competition. Who's that guy going to be? Right? Hey, we need somebody to step up in this red zone situation. Who's going to step up and be that guy? Hey, we're in a team situation and the defense has kicked our butt the last two practices. Who's going to step up and make a play today? And hopefully it's more than one someone, right? And so those are the things we're going to find out this spring, Ryan, is who's going to step up. And then also, not just from a playing standpoint, but who steps up into a leadership role this offseason. That's another big one. Because Caleb Smith comes in as a captain at Virginia Tech. But it's hard to go from a captain somewhere and then become a captain immediately with a bunch of dudes you didn't know.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a level of prove it there. Does Deion Colzie become that guy? Is it Tobias? Is it Jaden Thomas? Is it Lorenzo? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be Lorenzo because of some things that went on this year. But if it does, that's a great sign because it means he did some maturing this offseason.
Yeah.
And so those are things too, Ryan, is who steps up as playmakers, who seizes control of certain positions, not just because they're the oldest, because they're the best, and because they're playmakers, and then who steps up and provides leadership, because leadership hopefully doesn't just come from one guy. There's all types of different leadership. Who are going to be those guys? And those are the things that are going to be, we have to see. We're going to have to see how it pans out this offseason, because here's why it's important, Ryan, is not just this year, but moving forward. If you're Chancey Stuckey, because part of this overview is not just now, but future. You're creating a culture at Notre Dame, and you're that room. You need to be establishing a level of accountability, a level of attention to detail, a level of discipline, a level of unit strength that has to come from how you lead the room as the coach. And so to me, you're in that weird time where you've got these veterans plus these really talented freshmen. What example are you setting to those young players? You know, if a guy doesn't have the right attitude and isn't doing what he needs to do you keep trotting him out there? And then what lesson does that send to Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James and Rico Flores? And then eventually, once he arrives this summer, Caleb Smith. What message are you sending? And so those things are very important, because the culture of your program is being established. Because then in 2 years, those players are going to expect, well, wait a minute, why aren't you treating me the way I saw you treat Lorenzo 2 years ago, or the way that you treated Dion or Tobias or whatever, or Jaden? You know, those guys half butted it half the time, and you still started them. Why are you being different from me? It's a culture that's being created now. There's there's veteran players you need to develop, and there's young players who you need to make sure that they're coming along not just as players, but they're coming along from a culture standpoint. And again, there's all those different facets that go into what make a healthy position group room, right? Like accountability, discipline, you know, unit strength, attention to detail, all those things that you as a coach have to demand from them. And part of demanding is also holding people accountable. And sometimes holding people accountable means negative consequences. Hey, man, your head wasn't right, so I'm going to give so-and-so a shot today and see how that guy handles it. Does he go pout in the other room? Then you know, okay, he hasn't changed at all. He was just in a better mood because he was still a starter. But he hasn't changed at all because I put so-and-so in there for 2 days as the starter, and this is how he reacted. Coaches need to do some of that stuff, and especially in the spring. If you have a guy you don't need to do that to Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. You know who they are. You don't need to do that, Zeke Correll. But maybe you need to do that with Lorenzo Styles. Maybe you need to do that with Deion Colsey. Maybe you need to do that with Tobias or with Jaden Thomas. Maybe you need to do that with Logan Diggs and Audric Estime, right? Maybe you need to do that with Mitchell Evans. Guys who are maybe whoever steps in as initially at guard. Those are guys that you got to say, I'm going to throw some diversity to this kid today because I need to see how he's going to handle it. That's part of coaching. That's part of being a good coach. And you don't explain to them why initially. Say, hey, look, I want to give so-and-so a shot. I want to see what so-and-so can do today. Because the other part of that too, Ryan, is you're wanting to see, okay, Jaden Greathouse, I'm throwing you in with the ones today. I didn't tell you until right now in our team meeting before we got to practice, because I want to see how you respond. I want to see how you respond to quickly being told you got to get in there and see how he performs. And then also see how the other guy handles it. Let's just say hypothetically that I'm going to give Jaden Greathouse all the 1 reps today in the slot. Hey, Jaden Thomas, you know what? Today you're working with the 2s. Does Jaden Thomas still go out there and play at the level he always does? Does he show leadership? Does he coach up Jaden when Jaden's out there in the first group, the group he wants to be in? Is he still, cheering him on, meeting him when he makes good plays, or is he pouting in the back? Well, from what I know of Jaden Thomas, the reason I'm using him as an example is because from what I've been told of Jaden Thomas, he's the kind of kid that would handle that well. And he wouldn't be happy about it. It'd be more of okay, you want to put me on the second team? I'm going to show you. I'm going to go out and have a great practice today. But I'm also going to be a great teammate. I'm going to lead. I'm going to step up. I'm going to congratulate Jay when he makes a play. Or do you have a guy that kind of goes in the back of the line and pouts? Because that's going to tell you a lot about the healthier room. And so I hope the Coach Stuckey does. And people say, that's mind games. Yeah, exactly. Because I'm trying to teach mental toughness, but I'm also trying to bring out of you what your real character is. Because here's the reality, Ryan, as you know. It's easy to be a great teammate when everything's going great and you're the guy and everything's going awesome. But can you be a great teammate in a great part of this room when maybe things aren't going your way or you're not happy with your lot in life, right? Like we saw this with Jack Cohn when he got benched at times in 2021. Who was the first person out there to congratulate Tyler Buckner he'd make a play? Go watch the Virginia Tech game. Who was the first person to congratulate Tyler Buckner when he led them back from 10-0 deficit to 14-10 lead? It was Jack Cohn. Do you think Jack Cohn was happy having been benched? Nope. But he understood there's something bigger here than just me.
Yep.
And that's why you knew that Jack was going to – but here's why that's important, right? Because if his head's not in the right place, when Tyler gets hurt and he's got to come back in, He's not in the mind space to bring them back and win that ball game. And you need to know that. And there are times that you can develop that in practice. And so that's something that I'm very curious to see, Ryan, because this is a group who's the mental part to me is a much bigger question mark than the physical part with this group.
Sure.
Who has the mental toughness, the leadership, the football character, and the focus to be a great player. And that's something I'm challenging this spring every bit as much as I'm teaching them how to get off the press, how to properly stem, how to attack leverage, how to properly execute a top end, how to get out of the break fundamentally properly, how to play with leverage, how to stack, all that other stuff. That's important, but this part's just as important. And that's not something that I think Coach Stuckey could really focus on last year. Last year's just, I got to know who these kids are. I got to figure out who these kids are. And oh my God, they don't know how to get into a stance. You know what I mean? These kids have no concept of how to get off a press release, how to adjust their body depending on press versus inside, outside, head up, whatever, off. They have no clue how to do all this. I have to teach them how to play wide receiver at the very basic level. Well, that's in the rear view now. Now it's taking that next level. And that goes back to that challenge of Chancey Stuckey, but also the challenge of the players, Ryan, is who is going to merge and take that challenge well and step up and be the guy. And hopefully the answer by the end of the spring is there isn't one guy that did that.
Sure.
There's multiple guys that did that. And that's going to tell us a lot about how good this group can be.
The competitiveness that you're talking about, right? The competitive fire to be the absolute best and to work through adversity. Like that's what separates the good players from the great players, right? The average players from the good players. Like that is a separating factor. It really is. And I think that honestly, something that hurt the 2022 version of this group is when Avery Davis and Joe Wilkins get hurt, right? The lead dogs in the group, a bunch of sophomores were just pretty much, I don't want to say handed, but like they were forced into a situation where they had to be the guys, right? Like they didn't have to fend off Avery Davis or Joe Wilkins or guys that had been there, and it kind of earned a little bit of that room respect at that point, right? But this year, I think it's completely different, Brian, because everybody, like obviously Lorenzo didn't take the step forward that we wanted him to take, for instance, right? And I'm not trying to, I'm not throwing shade on Lorenzo. It's just he was a guy that I expected to be a big-time player in 2022. He did not fulfill that prophecy. But now you have 4 newcomers coming in, which I think is the best-case scenario for this group, because what I know about these young kids, having covered them and talking to them, is that Rico Flores, Jaden Greathouse, and Braylon James have swagger to their game. They are competitive kids that expect to play football in 2023 and to play a lot of it, right? So they're going to come in and they are going to have that chip on their shoulder that I'm going to work my butt off to get on the fields. That's going to be there. So either Lorenzo Styles looks at one of them in the face and says, nope, not today, and takes that challenge, or you're going to get passed up pretty quick. That's what's going to happen, in my opinion, right? Deion Colsey, you better be on your game every day because Jaden Greathouse is coming, buddy. Braylon James is coming. Those kids are going to be ready to play from a mental standpoint, right? I'm not talking about the physical side of things. I'm not even talking about the technical nuance side of things, even though I think Jaden Greathouse will be one that will be ready to go in that department. But mentally, they are going to push those guys. We've talked about Deion Colsey in the past, Brian, a young man that is young for his age and maybe needs a little bit of a kick in the butt to fulfill his potential, right? Well, kick in the butt's coming, man. If you don't think Jaden Greathouse is going to come and challenge you a little bit, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. So the young guys, the guys that were young last year that now enter junior year, sophomore year, they're going to be challenged by a bunch of newcomers. And I didn't even mention the older Caleb Smith, who is going to be in obviously in the spring as well, who, wasn't incredibly productive at Virginia Tech, but still had more receiving yards than any receiver on the team last year.
Productive relative to the offense that he played in. I mean, he had over twice as many yards as anyone else in that offense.
Yes. Yep. And he's a veteran player, a captain who's going to come in and is going to compete his tail off. And if you are the receivers that are coming back that are all ultra talented, they are looking at 4 newbies coming into the group, guys that they don't know, guys that they're getting their first introduction to, that are all going to be guys that I believe will come in and will push those players. So you have a good balance.
There's a 5th one that shows up in June.
Exactly.
That's a different type of cat.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you got 4 guys in the spring, and then another one that's coming in June, obviously, to your point. So you have 5 newbies to this group that I think is going to really help the competitive nature of this conversation, because last year there was no huge threat of like, hey, Lorenzo's not playing well. Well, who are you going to put in? Right? Like, you had Dion that was injured to start the year. You had Joe Wilkins that was banged up. You had Avery Davis that was out for the season. There was just lack of numbers. This year, there's not going to be as much a lack for numbers. If a guy isn't playing well, there is options that are on that bench to come out and to compete for you and to have play and to
And
earn
that
playing
wasn't there
time.
last year. It didn't matter how bad some people's attitude might have been. I still need to put someone out there, and that's really the options that I have, especially late in the year when Tobias went down.
Yep. And I think the veterans have there's 2 things that are going to happen to the veterans, Brian, in my opinion. One, they're going to rise to the challenge. Maybe Lorenzo Styles gets out of his funk. Maybe Deion Colsey takes a step to the next level because he knows that he has to work that hard. Or they're not going to take the challenge. And then at that point, it's sink or swim. And if they sink, I know it sounds, cutthroat or whatever, but like, if a guy's not performing, there's options behind him and guys that should be ready to play. So I think that this is a great litmus test this winter into spring and then into the fall to see if the older now talented receivers on the roster are up for the challenge, and also if the newbies coming in are ready to play football, because I think that there's going to be a couple kids that are going to be ready from the new group that's coming in. But regardless, competition makes everyone better, man. Competition shows character at the end of the day. If a player is a hard worker or can simulate a hard-working mentality, that will show. If they're not, they won't. So there's going to be a lot of internal growth this offseason, I believe. If not, some guys might get left in the cold.
I'm going to bring up a super chat to address something we were just talking about, and then we're going to get back to this conversation, Ryan. This is from Kirk D.A. Anderson Fitness. He says, thank you for the super chat, Kirk. Because what is stemming and stacking? I'm also an IB subscriber. Any videos on the site about these topics? I don't know if we have one from the past, but I will say this, Kirk. This is a great time to bring this up. Starting next week, we are going to, on our IB shows, our non-recruiting shows, we're actually going to start including the topic we're discussing, like today it's receivers. And then between that and the mailbag, we're going to have a football 101 segment we're going to add every day. Where every day we're going to talk about some kind of different football topic. And sometimes we'll tie it into the position group we're talking about, type of thing. We're not doing that today because we're not there yet. We're going to get that all set up for next week. We're going to come up with topics and do all that kind of stuff. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. We've had a lot of people ask about that. And hopefully those are just like 10, 15, 20-minute segments, and then it just kind of go from there. But to your specific topic. So a stem is essentially the release that you have while attacking a defensive back. So your stem is going to be the path, right, from where you are to where you're going to get to the moment where you get on top of a defensive back. That means the point where you're now going to make some sort of move on him, whether it's to run by him or whether then to break your route off. So it's the stem. And so it's just, it's really just like, it just like, here it is. It could look like this, but it's going to be a stem, right? And then my whole big thing with stemming was I didn't use the word stemming a whole lot. It's just to explain what it is. But when you're actually coaching, at least I didn't use the word stem very often, other than just like, hey, like the thing for me was I had 2 things. And I finally saw a Twitter video yesterday that talked about this, talking about receiving coordinator was using, I can't remember who it was, but somebody in one of the playoff games this weekend, where my whole thing was you're attacking the leverage. Your stem is going to be focused on attacking the leverage of the defensive back.
I think it was Brandon Ayuk, by the way.
Okay,
sorry, just
it was for the Niners, right?
Yes.
So you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And I say attack the leverage of the defensive back, and your aiming point is going to be his near shoulder. Now, there were some routes where I would have him really focus on the outside shoulder, no matter if that was but the point, I'm sorry, it was always the outside shoulder, excuse me. But sometimes I'd focus on the inside shoulder, just depending on the route that you're running. But your initial stem is going to attack his leverage. Leverage meaning if he's outside of me, his leverage is outside. I'm attacking him outside. If he's inside of me, I'm going to attack him inside. Because why? Normally, a defender is going to kind of line up in the part of the field he's taking away. And if he's lining up outside, because he doesn't want you to get outside of him. If he's inside, it's because of that. Now, there will be, good coach teams will kind of flip that. So they'll line up inside at the snap and pedal outside. That's okay. That's why I gave him an aiming point, because if that guy widens out, you're still heading towards the outside shoulder, right? And then widen his outside shoulder. But there's a play in that NFL game where the corner's lined up outside. And so what he wants you to do is he wants you to release inside of him, because he wants you to be then closer to where his help is. He's outside means he doesn't have help outside. It means all his help is going to be inside. So what the receiver did was he just kept widening him and widening him and widening him, and the corner kept sinking wider and wider and wider. And then he got to the top of his route and he just curled up. It was a simple curl route. But he was now way outside, away from the inside help. So he had widened that guy out, threatened his outside, and just curled up. That was like textbook route running 101 and stuff that we didn't really see from the Notre Dame receivers. Even last year, you didn't see a whole lot of that. And so what was cool about it is but you started to see them getting closer to that. But those are simple things, Kirk. Stacking is essentially, I mean, you stack two cups. One goes right on top of the other, right? So essentially, when you are running by a defensive back, a mistake that a lot of receivers will make is they'll just kind of get outside or inside and just kind of stay there. And then that allows the guy to just kind of stay right there on you, you know? So like if I'm running outside, Ryan, and you're covering me, and I just stay on my vertical path, you're right there on my hip and you've got me covered. My job is to stack you, meaning that's to put you on my backside hip where I now you're now trailing me and you can't do anything about it. So if I'm here and I'm going to pass you, so if I go it's probably better. If I'm coming at you and I go past you and I just stay outside, you're with me. But what I'm trying to teach guys to do is when you pass that guy, then you need to get on top of him and stack him. So he's now in trail position.
They have no angle of that they can recover from if you're stacked on top of a player.
They can only go through you.
Exactly.
And so
which is a pass interference.
So as long as the ball's thrown correctly, then you're in good place. So that's what stacking and stemming in. And I'm going to cut this into a video and we'll put this into so what we do is we put these onto our message board. There is a football 101 thing. Now there's not a lot in there because we just kind of went away from that, but that's going to be something we're going to do a lot more of here this offseason. So we'll have all those in there. So that's what stacking and stemming is. And they're really football 101 stuff, really. Like there's other routes I use. Like one of the ones I would always use, and I don't know if anybody else uses this, but I always had a thing where I taught my receivers was accelerate through the look back. Because a natural tendency of receivers is to, when they look back, to slow down. It's human nature. And I've used driving a car as an example, Ryan. When you're driving through a neighborhood or you're out on a country road and you know that country road, it's the road you always take to go to your dad's house. You're driving comfortably. You're almost like not even thinking about it. People ask you for directions. You're like, yeah, I don't really know what streets they are because I just know how to get there. So I don't need to slow down. But let's say you're coming to my house and you've never been there before, and it's a country road, and you're not sure because you're going to be kind of slowing down. Like as you take your eyes off the road and you're looking at different roads and milo markers, you're not going to be driving as aggressively. Not if you're smart. Your human nature is I'm just not going to be as fast. If you walk into a dark room, if you walk into your bedroom at night, let's say you're working and your wife's asleep, and you walk in there and your eyes haven't adjusted, and it's dark, you're fine because you know kind of the room. You walk into a dark room and it's not a room you're comfortable in. Let's say it's the first night you move into a new house. You're going to be like kind of walking slow, feeling yourself around, right? Same thing. Because if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to want to go as fast. Well, so it's human nature. So you got to kind of coach that out of guys with a lot of guys. So accelerate through the look back means, when you look back, speed up. Because in reality, they're not going to speed up. But what it does is it helps them maintain their speed. So there's all things like that receivers, coaches will teach and stuff like that. And we're hoping to kind of put some of that, give you guys some of that stuff and help you understand our terminology a little bit better. So, Kirk, thank you very much for asking that question. And hopefully you understand now. But it also is a great time to remind people, too, that we're going to start doing the football 101 last week, which, not surprisingly, when I brought up to Ryan, he was fired up about it. I don't think any of you are going to be surprised by that if you know him. So hopefully that helps you answer that question. Let's get back to the other part of it, Ryan, is because I think we're talking about you're correct. The young guys coming in, if the veterans don't step up, the young guys are going to beat them out. Mm-hmm. However, what I believe, you tell me if you agree or disagree, is that this team will reach its potential. This unit will only reach its full potential for this season, for 2023. The only way that this unit reaches its full potential is at least 3 of the returners step up and emerge, if not 4. Because if they have to play the freshmen because those guys are beating out the veterans, that's a great sign for the future. But Jaden Greathouse will not be as good of a player in year 1 as he will be in year 3. Braylon James will not be as good of a player in year 1 as he will be in year 3. And that's true for Rico, and that's true for Caleb Smith. And so the reality is, yes, Lorenzo, Dion, Tobias, the older Caleb Smith, Matt Salerno, Jaden Thomas, all of them can potentially get beat out by a younger player. And I would throw Tobias into that conversation as well. He's a part of that younger player guy because Tobias will be better as a junior and a senior as he will be as a sophomore. And so if those younger guys beat him out, that's fine. I'm fine with that. Those are good players. But it's also a bummer because this team will be better if at least 2 of the 3 2021 class members need to step up and take their game to another level. They need at least 2 of them. If all 3, perfect. But if only one of those 3 guys really takes his game to another level, that doesn't mean the receiving course can't still be pretty good, Ryan, but I don't know if it can reach its full potential. And I also think at the same time, this is kind of a now or never moment for that class. Because to your point, if they don't step up now, they're going to find themselves beat out. So I think this enters for just looking at the short term, this is a very, very important offseason for the 2021 receivers, which is Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, and Jaden Thomas. And the interesting thing of that trio, the guy that I'm most confident in now and knowing what we're going to get from him in 2023 is the guy we had the least confidence in a year ago. And that's Jaden Thomas. Because we kept saying, hey, we hear all these good things, but I've never seen him do anything. I haven't been in practices. The practices you guys were at didn't really do a whole lot. We kept hearing how good he was. And then he comes out early in 2022, and you're like, this is the dude you guys have been telling me how good he is. But by the middle of the year, you're like, oh, okay, yep, I get it. I see it now, right? And then by the end of the year, you're like, this dude's a pretty good player. So it is kind of funny how that changes where by the end now, I'm more confident in what I can get from Jaden Thomas than I am from Lorenzo or Dion. But it's a big offseason for all of them, Ryan. That class largely is going to determine the ceiling of what this receiver room is going to be in 2023.
I agree because I think that for me, you have a really nice 4-man class coming in, which is awesome, but also you shouldn't have to depend on freshmen to come in and be the guy from day one, right? I think that says more about the veteran group that was there than it does about the freshman group, right? Because it's awesome. It's like, oh wow, if Jaden Greathouse comes in and he's ready to compete, it's fantastic. But if one of the older wide receivers doesn't fight back and then fend him off a little bit, or at least, make it kind of split duty, then that's a bad sign, right? That's a really bad sign. And all due respect to Caleb Smith, the older Caleb Smith, because I think he's a good football player, but is he more talented than Deion Colsey? He's not, in my opinion, right? And when you look at that, it's like, well, if he's easily starting and he's a high volume getter, that tells me Deion Colsey didn't take the next step, right? That tells me Tobias Merriweather maybe didn't take the next step. Whoever, one of the bigger outside receivers, probably didn't make that next maturation. And I think that it's a failure from a class perspective for that 2021 group because it is exceptionally talented, right? I mean, from a talent level perspective, Deion Colsey should play in the NFL one day. He's that talented. Lorenzo Styles has all the makings and all the talents level to be an NFL wide receiver. Jaden Thomas is a talented football player. They're all extremely talented. And at the end of the day, if they're coming out, and because I think for me, Brian, the biggest thing is the newcomers coming in are all very talented, right? We've talked in nauseum about Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, the younger Caleb Smith. But that's junior class to be, they're also very talented football players, and they have 2 years of experience over those guys. So if they are getting beat out by those freshmen, I think that says more about the junior class that Notre Dame has this year than what the freshman class would be. So I think that we see this one very closely eye to eye. I really do, because I think that Deion Colsey is exceptionally talented. I think that Lorenzo Styles, if his head is on straight, he can be a very good football player. I believe that Jaden Thomas, if he takes the next step, could be a very impactful football player. And they're all equally talented. So if they get beat out, that's a very bad sign. And that tells me that class may be a little bit of a flop, and they need to be the best version of themselves Because if you have those 2 out of 3 or even 3 of those guys that can play and have an impact on your team, that's when you stack the talent. And that's when you show what the upside can be. Because then you add in, you have Caleb Smith, who's played a lot of football. You have the 4-man freshman class that are all very talented. One of the best wide receiver classes you've had at Notre Dame in several years. Like, you start stacking talent, and that's the differences between the really good teams and Georgia, where Georgia loses a player and they comes in. It's like, oh, nope, you didn't even miss a beat because they're all talented and they're all ready to go.
That's the thing, right? I think you nailed it, Ryan, is if those guys can be complementary weapons, can be depth players, can be guys that, Jaden Greathouse is coming in and filling it, and him and Jaden Thomas are a rotation, but Jaden's the guy, and then Jaden Thomas is the guy, and then Jaden Greathouse comes in and he's sort of the understudy, the next guy in, and now you're getting 2 guys with similar skill sets that it doesn't matter who's on the field, they're both good players, but to the other team, they're just getting worked by, that's the ideal situation. If on the outside, it's better that Tobias steps up and is the guy. And if Braylon James or Rico steps up and he's the next man in, that they're 10 to 15 snap a game, up next in line. When I'm in, I can make plays, but you're still the guy type of situation. It's better that way for this football team than for them to have to be the guy. And that's what we talk about, why it's so important for that group to step up. And a guy that he's going to kind of start suffering a little bit of that middle child syndrome. And that's Tobias Merriweather. Because we're going to talk about the veterans and how they got to step up. And then we're going to talk about the talented freshman class and how good they can be. And I think the people, maybe not the middle child for people in this chat, but for a lot of Notre Dame Nation, because I think people in this chat understand how good the kid is. But he's in a unique situation too, because he's got a battle to beat out the veterans, but then also hold off the younger guys. So this is a really big offseason for Tobias Merriweather too, because it would not shock me, Ryan, if by season's end next year, he's their best receiver. He's got the talent to do so, but he's got to start showing it. He's got to step up and show it. Now, we've heard he's done well in practice, and there's a level of, okay, now you've got to give him the opportunity to show it.
Right.
But Tobias wasn't an early enrollee last year. So this is his first chance to kind of go out in the spring without the pressure of, well, we've got to get ready for a game, so we've got to play the older guys. There's none of that nonsense in the spring. You're getting all these kids rep and see who the best guy is. This is a very, very important period for Tobias Merriweather, because if he's going to claim hold to, look, I need to be a focal point of this offense, he's got to start to show it this spring. And if he does, all of a sudden I start getting really fired up about what this receiving core can be. Because if Tobias really takes a jump, because I'll say this, I'm not predicting it because it's a lot to put on a kid. But I've talked a lot about the freshman to sophomore jump that we've seen receivers make at Notre Dame, where they didn't do a whole lot as freshmen. Golden Tate caught 6 passes as a freshman. Next year, sophomore, 1,000 yards. Will Fuller caught 6 passes as a freshman, most against Air Force. Comes out the next year, 1,000 yards. Equanimous St. Brown caught 1 pass as a freshman. Next year, would have had 1,000 yards if they played in a bowl game. So we've seen that, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Can Tobias make that kind of jump? Yeah, he can. Will he? I don't know. But if he's going to, we're going to start to see it this spring. So he's a guy, too, that I'm going to have my eye on to say, okay, he's got a year in the weight room now. He's got an opportunity in front of him. Braden's gone. There's no Avery. I mean, it's your chance, bro. Go out and seize it. And if he can start to kind of do that, it's going to make this unit better, because now it's like, okay, Tobias is balling. If I want to be that guy, I got to step up or step out. And so we're going to start to see that. And I'm to me, that could be the final ingredient to this receiving core becoming one of the nation's best. Am I predicting it's going to be that? Nope. They've got so much to prove. It would be total fanboyish for me to come in and say, right now, Ryan, they're going to be one of the 5 best receiving cores in college football last year. Like, hey, bro, let's pump the brakes a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't a fanboy show. But it's got the talent, Ryan. If everything goes to form, that it could at least by the season's end be in a conversation where if they're not in that conversation, we're talking about how next year they definitely will be. So I think he could be the difference between whether or not we're talking about next year or whether it is this year. Because if they become that type of 5 to 10 group this year, I have a hard time seeing that without Tobias stepping up and being that guy. Because I still say to this day, he is going to be the most talented guy in the room, in my opinion. And I think you have a different of opinion on that, but I think he's at least in the conversation for you. Am I correct on that, Ryan? But I think he's the most talented guy in the room. And I think for you as well, it's going to be true. This part will be true for you. Whoever you think the best guy in the room is, that guy needs to play like the best guy in the room for this group to be the best it can be. For me, it's Tobias, Ryan. Who would that guy be for you? As far as like, if everybody plays to their potential this year, that's the most talented guy in the room.
I mean, for me, I think the two guys that could have the biggest impact on this 2023 team, and Tobias is in that conversation, but for me, it's Deion Colzie and Tobias Merriweather. Like, I think that those two guys are the key, because it's not even just the fact of that they're both 6'4", 6'5", long guys that can make plays down the field. It also fits, though, perfectly into what Sam Hartman wants to do as a football player, as a quarterback, if he wins the starting job, right? Like you've seen at Wake Forest when they had A.T. Perry and the Jamal Banks kid and Donovan Green. They always had those long trees outside that were their most impactful football players, even going back to like the Sage Surratt type of days at Wake Forest, right? Like they always had those tall boundary receivers. Well, not even boundary. They just had those tall outside receivers. It wasn't even just in the boundary. So I think for me, for this team to be, for the wide receiver unit to be the best possible, Tobias is in that conversation. Deion Colzie's in that conversation, because I think that when Sam Hartman looking at a wide receiver to throw to, he's going to see those vines, right? He's going to see that size. He's going to see that vertical profile. And Tobias certainly fills that, man. I think that he's going to get a lot of opportunities to be that guy down the field. And I think that he's going to get a lot of opportunities when there's one-on-one coverage outside. And honestly, we didn't see that enough last year, right? It's like a guy has a one-on-one outside. Just take it. See what happens. Because when they did take an opportunity last year, some good things did happen. I mean, I think about like the Braden Lindsey catch against Navy, right? Like that fantastic catch down the field. I think about several plays that you're looking at last year. Jaden Thomas making the catch against BYU, even Matt Salerno in the first game of the season making that contested catch down the field. When Notre Dame had opportunities to win outside, I feel like they made a decent amount of plays down the field. It just wasn't nearly enough. I know Sam Hartman's going to take those chances. And who are the guys that are going to be most likely outside as long as they take the step forward? It's Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colzie. So I think we're on the same page, Brian, in the sense that I think those big wide receivers, especially, they need to step up this year, because that is what Sam Hartman wants. Those are two of the most talented players on the roster in general. And if Deion Colzie and Tobias Merriweather are making plays outside the numbers, good luck trying to stop these tight ends that Notre Dame is going to have. Good luck having Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles in that group inside in the slot. Like, I think that opens up so much if you have those tall, athletic, upside wide receivers making plays outside the numbers, because I think that that's where Notre Dame has a possibility to be just a headache for opposing cornerbacks next year, is the fact that you can match a lot of size outside, which is always going to be an advantage, at least from a body type perspective.
So Ryan, we look at the freshman class, and part of what I'm curious about this season is to find out just how much they push. Right? I do think that's an interesting aspect of this, is how much do they push this spring? Do they come in and because here's the one thing about that trio, all three of them, they're very confident. And I'll just be honest, the best receivers usually are borderline arrogant in their ability. And that's a good thing, right? Like, that's the thing where, like, I kind of want that guy to have that, you can't guard me, right? But then also have the work ethic and the desire to then go show it. Right. And that's, to me, what separates the good ones from the great ones. And part of me wonders because I don't see a lot of that in the older players, to be honest with you. I don't see that same, like Deion Colzie, for example. He is one of the most polite, nice, respectful young men you're going to see. Does he have that mindset of, I'm about to go put in work on you? I don't know if he has that naturally or not. I don't know, because I haven't seen him in practice regularly. So this is a genuine question. because he doesn't really show that on the field. He didn't really show that in high school because it just came so easily to him. And Jaden Mickey's got a little bit of that. I don't know if Lorenzo has that. Here's the deal, though. I know that 3 of the 4 incoming freshmen have that. I leave Caleb Smith out, the younger, because I don't know enough about him to know that, right? It's more of a question. But part of me wonders is if they come in, it would be a thing where I would look at it and say they could end up being the missing link for the veterans.
Agree.
Because it can be infectious. Like, oh, okay, this cat out here talking noise, and he went out and backed it up. Like, okay, or maybe they do it to each other in a fun way. But there's a lot of what I hated in the past. One of the things under Kelly's, they would kind of tamp that down in the freshman class. Come in here with all that noise. Like, enough with that. I want this freshman class to say, I don't care what you say. Right? If you don't like it, do something about it. If you don't want me talking to you, do something about it. And that's something I loved about Jaden Mickey. You could burn him for 3 straight touchdowns. He was going to still keep talking. It's just the confidence he had in himself, right? Benjamin Morrison has a confidence about himself. It manifests itself in a little bit different way. But you saw when Benjamin Morrison made some big plays, he's got some swagger to him, right? He's got some confidence. I mean, it just doesn't done in this form like it is with Jaden Mickey, right? But this Braylon James is a confident dude. Jaden Greathouse is a confident dude, and they will both let you know that they're good. And I think Rico's got a lot of that in him as well, Ryan. And he's a dude that's got some he's going to come in with the teeth and all, and he's like, guard me, I dare you. You know what I mean? And I hope I hope instead of the veterans kind of not liking it and be like, hey, tamp that down, rookie. I hope it feeds off on them. I hope the attitude of the younger players can feed off on the veterans, because if that happens, then I really start getting excited about what this room can be. Because here's the thing, if Deion's got that in him, but he just came into a culture where that wasn't really embraced, which is true, then maybe he's tamped that down a little bit. But
Sure.
now you come into a room where that culture is embraced and encouraged, and I hope that they do. You know what? Like, then maybe that comes out of him. And if that's buried inside of Deion and it's just hasn't come out yet, dude, watch out for him next year, right? And so those are important things. And then if those guys outside step up, then I don't know how you guard Jane Thomas in the slot.
Exactly.
I really don't. Because that's the thing that gets me fired up, Ryan. You can see I'm like sitting up on my chair, I'm getting fired up now. And that could honestly be the biggest contribution the freshman class makes, even beyond any production they have, is if you guys can get those older players, kick them in the flipping butt and get them to talk trash. It could even be a thing where Deion makes a play and Jaden and Braylon are talking trash for him. You know what I mean? And Rico's talking trash for him. And then next time Deion's like, oh yeah, okay, cool, let's do. And now Deion starts kind of being like, okay, I got this. He makes a big catch and looks at a cornerback on the ground. I like that stuff as long as you're not doing something that's going to get you a penalty.
Yep.
Right. Like, I wanted receivers that had that, I would almost kind of bring that out of guys if you could. I want guys that have, because here's the thing, if they get beat, if they drop a ball, those guys are not going to be worried about it because they know it's not who they are. And if you beat them in one day, they're going to come out that next day and they're going to try to whoop your butt. I want guys that if they have a bad game, if Deion comes out in a bad game and he only has 2 catches, you're like, and he dropped 2 balls. If you're the other team, I want you to be like, oh man, crap. Deion didn't have a good game. Tobias didn't have a good game. He's going to be pissed. Right. He's, you know what I mean? Like, now I got to put up with a pissed off Tobias Merriweather, pissed off Deion Coles, and oh God, this is going to be a long week. Like, that's what I want. And that's what you get from the best ones. And so to me, that's what I look at and say that's going to separate, honestly, that mindset is going to be the thing that determines largely how good this group can be, is what is their mindset about how they go about their business every day. And if the swagger of the freshman class can spread through that entire position group, then this group will be phenomenal in 2023. Sure. I truly believe that, Ryan.
Well, I would say this about that freshman class too, Brian. I mean, obviously that's a trait you're looking for, right? We were talking about this on the show yesterday. Like, I think you need more of that, man. I think you do. Like, there has to be that competitive fire. And like you said, it can manifest itself in different ways. But at the end of the day, that confidence and that swagger is something that you need on your football team. And I feel like with the 2023 freshman or the 2023 recruiting class for Notre Dame at wide receiver, you were looking for that personality trait, but also where does that come from is the better question. It comes from big time programs, right? Programs that are used to winning. No stage is going to be too big for a Jaden Greathouse who just won 3 state championships, a part of one of the best teams in the country in Austin Westlake. Like, they are used to winning football, and Jaden Greathouse is the manifestation of how he carries himself is because he was a part of that program, right? They expect to win. Folsom High School is a winner. Like, they win. That's all they do is win. You think Rico Flores has as much swagger as he is just because of his personality? It's part of it, sure. But it's also he's used to winning. Like, he wins and he dominates and he's a big part of it. Braylon James is playing against the Austin Westlakes every week, right? He's playing big-time football in the state of Texas. There's no stage too big for these guys. They're used to it. They're used to playing big 6A football in the state of Texas. They're used to playing at Folsom High School against the De La Salles of the world and competing for state championships. You didn't target just talented football players in this wide receiver unit in 2023. You targeted swagger. You targeted players from the premier programs in the country because they're going to be able to come in and challenge. They're going to be able to come in and not have stars in their eyes, right? Like, I mean, we talked about that a ton. I don't think Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, and Rico Flores showed up on campus, a couple weeks ago at this point with stars in their eyes. Like, oh my God, I'm at Notre Dame. No, they expect to be at Notre Dame. They expect to compete against the best of the best every single week. That's what they've experienced. That's where they've been bred. They're used to winning. And I don't think that Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, or any of the other wide receivers in this class are going to be shell-shocked or starstruck to be a part of Notre Dame. And that's a good thing.
Right. And that doesn't mean you don't respect and that you're not honored and all that to be at Notre Dame. But it's like, of course I'm at Notre Dame because I plan to go to the best.
Exactly.
And I'm going to show you that I'm the best. And that's what we're talking about. Because sometimes I think people can misconstrue that, Ryan, as like, well, he's not a – he doesn't value, or respect or this or whatever, this other nonsense, right? It's not about that, right?
There's no greater respect to Notre Dame than showing up every day ready to work. No greater respect than that.
Right. Absolutely. So that's kind of where I'm at with this group, Ryan. And look, it's got to start now. All right. If we hear that they're struggling through spring ball, it's going to make me a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to make me a little bit nervous. It's time to see it. It's time to see that group step up. And then it's kind of comes down to this last part of this, Ryan, is what does the future hold at wide receiver? When we do these things, we want to look to the future. And I think that's why we spent time talking about how important this is for Chancey Stuckey. Because what he can't do is he can't do what happened in the past, which is you have a really good receiving core, and then the next year it's like, and that was under Dell Alexander's, under the previous coaches, where, you'd have that great 15 and 16 receiving core. And then in 17, it's like, nothing. And then in 14, it was basically nothing. You need to start doing what Bama does, what Georgia does, what Ohio State does. And that's do it every year. I mean, so Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka were just dudes, just absolute studs for Ohio State, right? I mean, they were just great. It was without question, Ryan, the best receiving core class in the country, in my opinion, in 2021. It was certainly in the conversation for second or third at worst, and I think it was the best because they also got Jaden Ballard, who was a 4-star kid who hasn't done a ton, but they had him, right? So what do they do in the next year's class? They go out there and get another really good receiving core. They got Caleb Burton from Texas, who's a good player. I thought he's a little over a good player. They got a kid named Keon Graves from Arizona, who I loved as a route runner. It was a Chris Olave type of kid, right? Garrett Wilson type of kid. They got Koji Antwi from Georgia, who's a really talented player. And they got Caleb Brown from Chicago, who I love as a player, as you know. And so that's really good. That's back-to-back receiving classes. So then what do they do in 2023? They go and get Brandon Ennis, arguably the best receiver in the country, Cardinal Tate, Noah Rogers, and no one's talking about Bryson Rogers because of how good the other 3 guys are. And that's where it needs to get to for Notre Dame. It can't just be you have that one great class. It can't just be that second. You need to start stacking these classes on top of each other. And so to me, that's where we're going to find out over the next 12 months, right? 11 months, 10 months, whatever, how good Chancey Stuckey and Tom Reese are at really building an elite group. Because it's not just that one class, but people say, well, how are you going to convince them to come back? Well, Alabama does it. Georgia does it. Ohio State does it. So part of it is the product you put on the field. If the product you put on the field is good enough, then you can start doing that. So number one, put a good product on the field. That comes down to Coach Stuckey doing his job, doing his part, and the product's going to be there. And then the second part of that is working your butt off to say, hey, I'm not settling for that group. I'm not, we'll take the year off because that group's really good. We'll focus on building up 20. Nope. That's not the best teams do. So I want to see that he can go out and get me another really good receiving core. Is it going to be a bunch of 5-stars? No, I don't care. I don't care about that. I just care about me looking at it and saying, boy, that's a big time group right there. Off to a great start with Cam Williams. But honestly, that's the guy you should get. I mean, I'm sorry.
Chicago kid.
It's not that you didn't. I mean, they had to come back and get him
yeah.
because they started from behind and all that other stuff. That's fine. But with all due respect, you should never miss on a kid from Chicago if you want him. It just shouldn't happen.
Right.
And so great start, but that is a great start. It's what you did. It's the benefit of having Chicago getting better and better and better, producing talent, getting back to, maybe closer to the way it used to be. Because there's some 2025 kids in Chicago as well. Have you seen the D lineman from Fenwick yet, Ryan? Did Sean Davis show you that kid? Wait till I send you his film.
Yeah.
He was the guy that got defensive player in the league that year, not Justin Scott. Right? And so he's a dude. Looks like a grown-up. There's a couple quarterbacks in the 2025 kid. I watched film of an Ethan Plum kid. They're raising the level in Chicago. I don't know why. I don't know how, whatever, but it's starting to get back there. You should lock that down. So kudos to Chancey Stuckey for doing something the previous coaching staff should do. But that doesn't show me, yep, he's ready for round 2. No. Sure. It's what you add with Cam that defines that. Because Dell Alexander got Tobias Merriweather in his last class. Okay, what else did you have? Nothing, because when it comes signing day, C.J. Williams is gone and Maureen Walker was gone. So it didn't matter. You got one dude. So is it going to be Cam Williams and just some okay guys that you got because you missed out on everybody else? Or is he going to be able to say, hey, look, I'm going to get another one? And that's something I'm curious to see. Can you go get a Breedell Richardson out of Florida? Can you go get an Emmett Mosley out of California? Can you go battle for some of the top players in the class? Can you get back in it with Micah Hudson or not? Say, well, it might be a little too hard with Micah Hudson because you didn't have an offense on the field that's going to attract him, and you're just going to be too far behind by the time your offense starts putting out. Okay, that's fair. I mean, would you say that's a fair? I mean, I can't really fault. That's not Chancey's fault. Stuckey's fault. No. What the offense did this year. Can you go get a Josiah Brown? Can you convince some of those top players, Jeremiah McClellan? And here's the big one. Here's the big fish that's still on the board, right? Can you convince Ryan Wingo to come play for you? Right? Like, with all due respect, Ryan Wingo is the kind of guy that you should get if you're Notre Dame. I'm sorry. 5-star kid from a really good private school in St. Louis. I'm sorry. You should be able to get that kid.
High academic kid, not the super NIL kid like some receivers are.
He's going to look at NIL like every other big-time player should look at NIL. It should be a part of your conversation, but he's not going to go to the school that gives him the biggest upfront guarantee NIL package. I don't think that's going to be a factor for him the way that it is for others, to your point. And so you got to get those guys because you now have to show me that you can stack these classes on top of each other. And that's what he showed he can do step 1, right? But now step 2 is the most important part. And that is, can you do it consistently? Because there's a school about 4 hours southeast of here, 4 to 5 hours southeast of here that can show them they can do that. You can go get Southern kids and have them come up north and play in the cold. If you put a good enough product on the field, they'll do it. Because, Carnell Tate's from Chicago. But where are the rest of those dudes from? Chris Olave was from California. Right, Garrett Wilson was from Texas. Yep. Marvin Harrison Jr. Where was he playing ball at? Was he in Florida? Where was Marvin playing ball at? I don't remember where he was playing ball at, to be completely honest with you. But last year's class, you look. Brandon Innes is from Florida. Bryson Rogers from Florida. Noah Rogers is from North Carolina. As you said, we talked about how good that 2021 class was, right? Marvin Harrison was from Pennsylvania, and you got Emeka Egbuka from Washington. So you're going all over the country and getting kids to come play for you. And Notre Dame's got to be able to do that. Notre Dame's got to be able, in a couple of years, to be able to go get the Marvin Harrison next time, right? I mean, a kid from Philadelphia, I mean, why are you not a player for that kid? He went to St. Joseph. He went to a Catholic school in Philadelphia. But why didn't you get him? Why would you go to Notre Dame over Ohio State if you're a receiver? Right? That's the question mark. And so I think that's the challenge that Coach Stuckey has. But it's also the challenge to me that Coach Reese has. Because for me, when you get into these scenarios, the receivers coach can only do so much. You have to have a situation where the system is in place that if I bring you the receivers, so if I'm Chancey Stuckey talking to Tommy Reese, if I bring you the receivers, if I coach them up and get them to know how to play this game at a high level, you've got to now put them in. You've now got to make sure that the system is created where they can go produce. Now, I'm not saying Notre Dame's receivers are going to kind of produce the way Ohio State's offense is. It's a different offense, but they don't have to produce that way. They just have to be really good. They just have to be guys that can kind of go out there and have production, be high draft picks. Because that's the whole point is if Tommy Reese can put an offense on the field that allows these guys to produce numbers, then it makes it even easier for Coach Stuckey to go out and recruit and Coach Reese to go out and recruit. So that's the reality of it, right? So I was just talking about how it's not just Chancey Stuckey, though. It's also Tommy Reese putting the system in place to allow the production. So we've got to see that Coach Stuckey can be that guy. I think he is but that's a projection based on what he did in year one. He's now going to go show it. And sure. I think the big litmus test for me is going to be Ryan Wingo. Now, that doesn't mean if Ryan Wingo's not in the class, it means that he didn't do a good job. I'm not saying that, but it's going to tell me if he's an elite recruiter. If you get Ryan Wingo in this class, it tells me you're an elite recruiter. And that's what I'm curious to see from him. And if Ryan Wingo goes somewhere else initially, do you have the, chutzpah to say, I don't care, right? Because we talked about this last year with Mike Mickens. There was a time when Christian Gray had Notre Dame a distant third behind LSU and Ohio State because they were the hot programs, just like Tennessee is now for Ryan Wingo. But Mike Mickens said, I don't care. You can feel however you want to feel right now about Ohio State and LSU because I know when it's all said and done, I know where you're going to be. And that's what he did. And look where Christian Gray is right now. He's not far down the street from me right now at the University of Notre Dame.
And Mickens has taken a similar vantage point to Caleb Beasley in 2024 as well. Like, I'm not giving up on that kid just because he's committed to the University of Tennessee. Like, I'm going to stay in on him, and we'll see what happens at the end. And, I mean, I agree. I think that's something that you want to see from Chancey because, I mean, you saw a lot of great things, right? I mean, it's getting a Jaden Greathouse is no – getting Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James and Rico Flores, and that's substantial. The point-blank period, too, is, Brian, we talked a lot about the Texas kids, but Rico Flores would not be in this class right now if it wasn't for this new staff and Chancey Stuckey. Like, he wouldn't be. He wouldn't be, right? So,
and they caught a little bit of a break, too, right?
Sure.
Which is the school he wanted to go to filled up with other dudes.
Sure.
I mean, that's just if Ohio State, let's be real. Now, maybe they would have flipped him later, but if Ohio State would have pushed and wanted Rico Flores, he probably commits to Ohio State. I do think Notre Dame would have beat Georgia for him, but I think he would have gone to Ohio State. But that's okay. Take advantage of those opportunities when they come. Okay. Ohio State's done it. And so, I mean, C.J. Stroud probably would have been a lot harder to get out of California if USC didn't suck. Let's be real about that. And if they wanted him, well, big mistake by Ohio State or by USC. And kudos for Ohio State. They took advantage of that. And so I don't care how you get him here. I don't care who might have passed. Just get him here. That's the key. Okay. And then the other thing, too, is what helps is having C.J. Carr. Because somebody made a great point, and I want to bring this up. I think it was Logan. I almost said Logan Thomas, but that's the kid that's committed to not committed to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame just offered recently. That was a slip of the tongue. He is not committed to Notre Dame. I just wrote his name down today because he's Edge. Yeah, because they're visiting him. I'm not predicting they're going to get him, so people take that and run with it. But Logan Thayer said C.J. Carr being committed and still attending 7-on-7 events is huge for wide receiver recruiting, especially when you consider that Ryan Wingo and Jeremiah McClellan and T.J. Moore are on his 7-on-7 team. So, yeah, it helps.
Still wild to think about, man. I was telling Brian, everyone the other day, I was just like texting CJ, and I'm just like, man, how'd you work that out, man? How'd you get that wide receiver group? Like, that's bonkers, man. It's insane. Yeah. So, yeah, great point, though. Great point.
Yeah. So that's the final piece of this moving forward is because like Notre Dame's in a good place for the next few years at receiver, in my opinion. But pretty soon, it's just once that class goes, you're down if you're not able to build on it, and that's going to be the key. That's going to be a key. So Ryan, this is an interesting group, as we mentioned. I really don't know what to expect. I just know what I hope for, and what I think this unit's capable of. And I think that more than anything is we're not talking about Notre Dame anymore from a standpoint of I hope this good player can become great. I hope this okay guy can master the technique and play above his talent level. Yep. I hope this guy doesn't get hurt because after that, they've got not a lot, which is where we've been at receiver for years. And so to me, when I look at it and I say, boy, this group has got a chance to be good. In 2019, if you could take Chase Claypool out of the game, you had a decent shot at slowing Notre Dame offense down. You can't really this group has the potential for that not to be a thing anymore. And that's what I'm really excited about. What I'm really looking forward to is if it can get to the point where it's capable of. The reason I'm excited is because there's a lot of talent. That's young talent, because here's the deal. They have 10 kids on scholarship. One's a walk-on, former walk-on, and the other 5 are true sophomores or true freshmen. So it is young. So I don't expect it to reach its full potential where everybody reaches their full potential this year. But the point is there's enough talent where some combination of 5 of those dudes are going to really step up and be really, really good. And that's really all you need. The other guys can be role players this year and then eventually become dudes. But if you can give me that, I feel really good about how this group is going to be. And if it's as good as it can be for this season, all of a sudden this Notre Dame offense becomes scary good because the line's going to be there. The running back room is going to be there. The tight end room is going to be at least solid. And you've got talent at quarterback. This group now has no more excuses. You got numbers, you got talent, you've got all the other positions around that are in a good position. It's time for them to say, okay, no more excuses, coach them up, and then go out and play. And if they can do that at a high level, the level they're capable of, this is going to be a fun year to be someone who likes the pass game and likes talented receivers. That's how I feel, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's I feel like it's the ultimate wild card, Brian. Like, it really feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, at least offensively, because again, you have your proven products, right? You have Sam Hartman coming in and Tyler Buckner and a lot more talent in that quarterback room than you've had in recent years. You probably have more answers there. You have a dynamic group of running backs. I mean, so much so that there's going to be some really talented running back that is running back 6 on the depth chart this year. Like, it's just kind of that's the bottom line to it, man. Like, that running back room is absolutely ridiculous. And the offensive line, I expect to take a massive step forward in the second year of Harry Hiestand. If the first year was any indication down the stretch of the season of how good this unit can be with Joe Walton, Blake Fisher, and Zeke Corral in the middle, I think that replacing the 2 guards and giving those guys a second year with Harry Hiestand is going to be a big, big plus for this team. But at the end of the day, the wide receiver unit has a lot of talent. There's no doubt. I mean, there's a lot of bodies. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of former 4-stars, to your earlier point. But if they hit their potential, then how do you stop this offense? How do you stop it? Because I think the run game's going to be there. I think quarterback's going to be way better, obviously, and more consistent. If the wide receivers are playing at a high rate and the offensive line's good, pick your poison at that point, man. I mean, again, give Coach Reese and this offensive coaching staff as many options as possible. And if they do, I think that this offense could be one of the best in college football. But at the end of the day, I think it is going to hinder a lot on how good this wide receiver unit is. Is it a good unit? Is it a great unit? I think there's some separation that could happen, but I think it has the potential to be one of the better units in college football. But that is the potential talk again. That is not the production talk yet.
So that's going to be it for this particular topic. We've got a mailbag coming up next, and we're going to keep having these kind of breakdowns of the various groups here in the offseason here moving forward. But that's going to do it for this portion of the show. So hang around. Don't go anywhere, everybody, because we do have a mailbag coming up. We've already got 27 different question stars and a lot of really good stuff coming up. So before we do get to that, though, please do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Make sure you sign up for our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We also have our newsletter has been up and running. We've been getting that out on a daily basis here moving forward. And, we need all the help we can get because apparently I need to now start paying for better Ryan's internet here moving forward so we can get him rocking and rolling. But in all seriousness, though, we do appreciate all your support. I know a lot of you should be receiving your Gold Club mugs and T-shirts and such soon. I know a lot of people have already reached out. Bob O'Day in the chat got his. So hopefully you guys enjoy those. That is, for those that don't know, if you are a Shamrock Blue or Gold Club member, it used to just be you did it to support us, and you're still doing it just to support us. And all we could really afford to do is give you a thank you. Well, we had a good year, and I really felt it was important to really support the people that have supported us, or give more of a thanks to the people who supported us. So now, if you're a Gold Club member, you get a free IB Gold Club T-shirt, a free IB Club mug. If you are a Blue or Shamrock Club member, you get the IB Club mug, which we're very excited about. And if you have already signed up for those clubs in the past, you will get grandfathered in, and a lot of those have been sent out as well. And if you upgrade from a current membership to those, again, you're a part of it as well. So we certainly appreciate all of the support there, and the people that have helped us, really helped us grow. It's been a fun 3 years of growth, and we're just now getting started. I did post the editor position yesterday, Ryan. We've had a bunch of people already reach out for interest there. So hopefully we'll be able to start getting some interviews here set up here very soon to move on to that job. And then we'll look for the next hire right after that. So anyway, before we get to that mailbag, I just want to thank everybody for that. If you're listening via podcast form, please give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And don't forget, sign up for the CFB Nation podcast app as well. And also check out our videos on YouTube for CFB Nation and Irish Breakdown. Mr. Roberts, it is mailbag time. We have a lot of really good questions today, and I want to get to some of these. So first of all, from Ryan's former bully, this is Tommy Guns' new name. I have no clue where this comes from. He must have the day off and he's just really bored. I'm not sure about that. But from Tommy Guns, one of our OGs, how about K13 and K17 or KF and KS, freshman and sophomore, freshman and senior? So we'll figure something out, because I don't want to have to be saying Caleb the elder and Caleb the younger all the time.
KK Smith, man.
Yeah.
It's easy. It's easy.
Just
make it happen.
Just sounds weird. I'm 45. I'm 44 years old. I'm gonna be 45 soon. Like, I'm not, I'm not calling some kid KK, right? You ever see that? I think it was on the original Kings of Comedy one. Do you ever see that with like Cedric the Entertainer and Steve Harvey and Bernie Mac? And it's really funny, but it's like Cedric the Entertainer talking about some dude said his name was Delicious. Man, I'm a grown man, dog. I'm not calling some other dude Delicious. Like, I'm just, that's kind of how I feel about calling somebody KK. It's a cool nickname, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel. Plus, I don't know the kid, so I always feel weird about like calling people nicknames if I don't know them. So, but we'll think of something. We'll think of something, Tommy. But thank you.
I guess we could just call the older Caleb VT for his stop at Virginia Tech. I don't know.
Sure.
VT.
Sure. We'll figure something out. So we have one from Rob Osgood. Thank you, Rob. He says, with the wide receiver, is the room better in numbers than last year? In my opinion, it's like the NFL draft. More picks you have, the better chance of hitting a couple. Not all picks pan out. And I think, Ryan, that's what we kind of talked. That's what you talked about very early, Ryan, was because there's so many more talented bodies, the margin for error is much greater this year than it was last year.
That's how it always that's how it works just in general, right? It's like the more shots you take, the more opportunities you have to hit, right? The more bullets you have in your holster. Like, whatever cliche or whatever, kind of whatever metaphor you want to use, like that's how it comes down to, man. The more opportunities you have to develop a really talented wide receiver, the more likely you are that you're going to develop more. The numbers will always help in that regard, as long as you are getting talented players, right? If you bring 10 not incredibly talented wide receivers into the room, you shouldn't expect to develop 4 stars, right? But the fact that Notre Dame has pulled in a lot more talent in the wide receiver room, it gives you optimism that, like, hey, if Coach Stuckey and the staff can develop properly and our offensive identity can get these players involved, then you have an opportunity to have more chances at developing the wide receiver position, because there's talent in that room, obviously.
Let's go to the next question here from Jordan Schreiber. Says, do you think Bill O'Brien will be a good OC for the Pats after being such a terrible OC for Alabama? I want to say something about this, because there's another question here that Jordan asks about Al Golden. We'll go to that next. But just because someone's not as good as another guy, or maybe not good enough, doesn't make them terrible. It's not
Yes.
Steve Sarkisian or garbage. Bill O'Brien was not a championship OC at Alabama, and I am an anti-Bill O'Brien person as a human being, and I think he's a very overrated offensive mind. But he isn't terrible. Wasn't terrible at Alabama. So I'll just kind of eliminate that part from the question, Ryan, and just ask you this as my resident NFL guy: do you think Bill O'Brien will be a good offensive coordinator for the Patriots? Because that's where he is going.
So someone talked about it on Twitter this morning. I mean, he'll certainly be better than what they had. I mean, they had Matt Patricia and Joe Judge.
A low bar.
Offense.
That's like saying Chancey Stuckey was a better receivers coach than Del Alexander. Like, that's a pretty low bar.
But I think the starting point is did you upgrade the position if you're New England, right? And the answer is yes. I mean, obviously, Bill O'Brien is not an idiot. Like, he knows offensive football, and he's been successful in a couple spots. And I mean, one of his biggest successes was he was a good OC at New England before. I mean, I think that there is some context to that, right? You had Tom Brady at that point. You had, maybe a little more offensive firepower than what New England has right now with the Mac Joneses of the world. But ultimately, it's got better in New England. There's no doubt. And I agree with you completely. He wasn't a bad OC at Alabama. He just wasn't as good or as good as what their
standard is. Exactly. Yes. Exactly. It's about the standard at Alabama and the standard at Notre Dame. And go ahead, Ryan.
I know. I was just going to say, I think both sides are going to pay dividends on this one, though, right? Because I would say New England got better at offensive coordinator, no doubt. A guy that's familiar with them as well, which has played well into the Bill Belichick tree, right? When he brings guys back that he knows and is comfortable with, like the Josh McDaniels of the world, they usually do pretty well. But on the other side, Alabama, I think, knows that they need to be better at the offensive coordinator position. So you now have an opportunity to get an OC in there that could get you to the next level and back to championship level football on the offensive side of the ball. So I think Alabama benefits, and I think New England benefits because you certainly upgraded from where you were last year. There's no doubt about that.
Who's their new OC?
I don't think they named anybody yet.
Yeah, I got to see who he hires first to before I'm ready to say it's going to be better.
The name that keeps getting popped out there is Jeff Lebby. I don't know if that's legitimate.
I've heard that.
I've heard that
and
a bunch.
He did a nice job. People are going to look at Jeff Lebby and they're still saying, well, look at a good job he did at Ole Miss. And I'm like, yeah, but he wasn't the play caller at Ole Miss.
Sure.
And his offense at Oklahoma this year was okay.
Sporadic.
Yeah. It wasn't great. Yeah. And he had some players to work with, and it was just, I mean, it didn't knock my socks off. I mean, playing in the Big 12, which isn't as bad defensively as it was in the past, they only averaged a point better than Notre Dame did this year. And, it's like, and that's kind of with playing a not great schedule, and scoring 45 points on a 5-7, MAC team in UTEP and scoring 33 points on Kent State who had a losing record in the MAC. They just weren't great this year and got shut out. I mean, just got destroyed by Texas. So it wasn't really a great offensive job this year. But again, year one and injury to quarterback and some other stuff that kind of went on. But he didn't knock my socks off this year, to be completely honest with you. But I think that would be an upgrade from Bill O'Brien, because I think Jeff Lebby's, from what I understand, is a little bit more of a team player. And I think that's one of the issues with Bill O'Brien is he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. And he doesn't want to listen to other people. And you got a pretty good assistant coaching staff at Alabama on offense right now. I mean, I like the O-line coach. I like Harlan Wiggins, who's the receivers coach, as long as he stays. I mean, they got a good running backs coach. Like, that's a good room. I don't think the OC was a good leader and was good at, listening to everybody. If Jeff Lebby's more of okay, I'm the guy in charge, but the part of being in charge means we're going to get all of our ideas out there, and then I'm going to figure out what's the best for us, then they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine. But the big thing is I think the bigger thing for Alabama, if we're just looking at this from an Alabama standpoint, the biggest hire for Alabama this offseason, Ryan, is not who they hire as the offensive coordinator. It's who they hire as the defensive coordinator, because that's the part of the ball that's, to me, taking the biggest step back is the defensive coordinator. They're going to have a ton of talent on defense next year. They had a ton of talent on defense this year. But as we predicted in the offseason, it was not going to be as good as it should be, because Pete Golding is a bad DC, in my opinion. Like, Bill O'Brien's not awful. I think Pete Golding's awful. I do. I think he's a really bad defensive coordinator. I don't think Bill O'Brien's a bad offensive coordinator. I think he's an overrated offensive coordinator and a jerk. That's what I think Bill O'Brien is. And so that the DC move is the more important one for me, because they got to get back to a little bit of being able to stop people on defense, and they haven't really been able to do that in recent years.
Well, maybe Matt Patricia might be available. So,
oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, yeah, you never know.
I still hate that guy has a pencil in his ear and he has a laminated play sheet. It's
like so lame. It's like, bro, what are you doing?
Doesn't make any sense to me.
What exactly are you writing on that pencil? Does he even like a notepad in his pocket for like halftime?
I don't think so. I've never seen him actually use the pencil. He just puts a pencil in his ear. So I don't know.
He's that coaching dude, that guy that just like is the stereotypical coach. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
The guy just thinks like, well, I do this to show him a coach. It's like, bro,
yes.
Just chill, man.
Nobody will know he's a coach otherwise.
Yeah, if I don't do all this, like, bro, just stop, man. Just stop. But the other question that he had was, did Diaco, Elko, Lee, Freeman ever have 1 year as bad as Golden his first year at DC? I don't understand why you keep calling him smart. That's last out of 5 coordinators, only better than BBG. First of all, the answer to the first part is yes. I mean, I can't say that for Freeman because he was only here for a year. And I think the defense was better last year than this year. But for Elko, his 2017, from a statistical standpoint, wasn't as good as Notre Dame's defense last year. And here's another thing that people are not talking enough about when we're being critical about Golden is Al Golden was not good enough this year for it to be a championship football team. He was not. Al Golden did not do a bad job this year. Right? This is the thing we keep talking about, Jordan, is there's a difference between did you do a good – like, it's not championship or you suck. It's really not. You can say championship or not good enough, and that's totally fair, and that's where we are. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. It was not good enough for the standard that was set by previous coordinators, but more so because to be a championship defense. The job he did this year was not nearly as good as the job that, to me, Clark Lee did in 2018 or 2019. But I'll tell you this right now, it was definitely better than the job that Clark Lee did in 2020. I mean, definitely better. And if you look at this year's team gave up 329.3 yards per game and 5.2 yards per play. In 2020, they gave up 343.6 yards per game and 5.6 yards per game. And that was with a regular season that had like 1.5 good offenses on it. Because I kind of take Clemson out, because when you lose Trevor Lawrence, you should not have been giving up that many points to that offense. I'm sorry. Okay. It was not a good defensive performance. Your defense sparked you to, your offense sparked you to a good early lead, and then you started getting worked and giving up big plays. So I'll take the job that he did this year over the job Clark Lee did in 2020, every day of the week. And Elko's is just completely. I mean, Diaco was just a completely different situation. I mean, with all due respect, Notre Dame had good players this year. Go look at what Bob Diaco was working with in 2011. There's some flat out dudes on that defense in 2011 and 2012. Yep. Right. And so I just think that we need to find the right way to discuss the job Al Golden and Al Washington did as coaches this year, and have a more productive conversation. Because if your conversation is that he was bad, then we're not on the same universe as in a conversation. Right, Jordan? So that's my thing, is we can be critical of the job he did and should be. And I think the question is fair in comparing him to those other coaches. That's the standard that's been set. But if you're going to say that he did a bad job, then you've got to give me evidence for that, other than just a feeling that you had. Because statistically, this year was not bad compared to other seasons. It wasn't as good, but it wasn't bad. And I think that's the thing that we got to be able to look at. And there were some moments where the defense was downright pretty good at times. It just was way too inconsistent. And I will say this is probably the most inconsistent defense that Notre Dame has had in several years. And that's something he's going to have to figure out. But the highs were also pretty high. And that's something that's a positive, right? And so now he's just got to take a much bigger step forward. But I don't think Al Golden was bad this year. I think he just wasn't good enough based on the standard that we're talking. It's kind of like the Bill O'Brien thing. Bill O'Brien wasn't bad at Alabama. He just wasn't good enough. And he was a jerk. Al Golden's not a jerk, but he's not good enough.
And can I also say this too, Brian? I mean, because I don't. One thing I don't like about how this is phrased, and this isn't really a shot at Jordan as much, but even if Al Golden doesn't end up being a championship level defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, I'm still not going to say that he's not smart. He is smart. He's been around football for a long time. He's been in a lot of places. he's a very respected person from an football intelligence side of thing too. So some guys maybe just aren't great defensive coordinators. Maybe that's Al Golden at the end of the day, but that doesn't mean he's not smart. He is a smart football guy. There's no doubt about that.
I think another thing too, Ryan, is you can be a smart football guy and not be a great head coach or not be a great coordinator or not be a great, Kerry Coombs didn't all of a sudden forget how to be a football coach and didn't forget football when he went from being one of the most respected corner coaches, DB coaches in the business to an awful defensive coordinator. Like Kerry Coombs is bad. That's a bad defensive coordinator. That's a guy giving up 26, 27, 28 points per game with Ohio State's talent. Right? That's not what that's not what Al Golden was this year. And so to me, that's the kind of thing that I look at and I say, hey, we need to be having a little bit more of a kind of constructive conversation when we're going to have these things. So, but I do appreciate the question, Jordan. I really do. Lance Hab says, scale of 1 to 10, Notre Dame has 2 receivers this year that go over 1,000 yards. What say you, Mr. Roberts?
I just don't see it, right? Like, I mean.
Okay, so where would you be on a 1 to 10 scale and why?
I'd be at like a 2. Like I'd be very low because I think that for me, and it has nothing to do with the lack of production as much. I think that it's going to be spread out a lot. Like I think that Deion Colsey will have opportunities. I think Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles, like the tight end position, running backs using the passing game. I just think that it's going to be a very spread out passing game. I just don't think that there's going to be 2 guys that are just the foregone volume getters in the passing game. So I'll leave it really low. I think it's like a 1 or a 2. Like I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I'm not even sure, honestly, if there's going to be 1,000-yard receiver on the team. Like I'm not 100% positive on that one, right? So I think it's just low because.
Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 about 1? Because I'm with you on 2 for 2.
4 or 5.
Yeah, I'm a little higher
low.
than 4. Just because I could see a Tobias, I could see a Deion, I could see a guy like that, including the postseason getting to that level. That wouldn't surprise me.
Sure.
I'm at like a 5 or 6 for 1.
Yeah.
I'm at a 2 for 2. Just because
I'm like a 4 or 5.
Here's why I'm at a 2. In I'd probably lean more to 3 than 1. Is simply because part of the reason that I don't think they're going to get to 1,000 or maybe even 1 is because A, spread it around, but then 2, because how good they're going to be at running the football.
Yes.
But the other part of that too, Ryan, is that's where your run game could actually help you get to a couple guys with 1,000 yards because you maybe don't need the volume of catches to get there in that instance, where Notre Dame doesn't really have a home run runners, home run threats at runner. They have, we're going to kind of beat you into the ground. That's kind of how we're going to do you. And so, when for example, in 2017 or 2018, remember we had a question recently where when was the last time a team had 2,000-yard rushers, 2,000-yard receivers, and a 3,000-yard quarterback? Yeah. And we couldn't remember. And it was 2018 Oklahoma was the answer because the quarterback rushed for over 1,000 yards, right? Kyler Murray. But they had 2,000-yard receivers, but their catch numbers were not insane. It was Marquise Brown had 1,300 yards and CeeDee Lamb had 1,158 yards. Well, they did it on 75 and 65 catches, Ryan, because they both averaged over 17 yards a catch. I could see a scenario where, let's say Deion Colsey breaks out, right? And he has a 75 catch, 1,050-yard season. It's pretty good, right? So, let's say 1,050 yards divided by 75 catches. That's, 14 yards a catch. That's not too bad. I don't see another receiver having 65, 70 catches and averaging about that. But could I see a scenario where, Tobias Merriweather has 1,000 yards on 55 catches, which is 1,000 yards, but 18 yards a catch because it's just volume stuff, 3 catches for 120 yards in some games? I could see that because of the run game. But it would have to be something like that, Ryan, and I just don't know if they're going to feature 2 guys enough with the numbers to get there. So that's why I'm low. But the reason I'm not all the way down to 1 or saying it's not going to happen is because I do think the run game could be a thing that benefits them to where maybe the yards per catch goes up more and they don't have to produce as much volume. Because the thing about the Oklahoma guys, they played a lot of snaps. because of the nature of the offense. The receivers won't get as many targets as those guys got because the offense is just different. And I don't see Notre Dame kind of going out there and passing for 4,500 yards this year like the Oklahoma team did. But even then, the reason you got 2,000 yarders is because you'll average 11.3 yards per pass attempt, which is huge. I just don't see Notre Dame running that many plays, to be completely honest with you. And that team also did that right in 14 games. So in order for Notre Dame to play that many games, they'd have to win a playoff game, which that'd be great. I would be very happy about that. The point is, it's even harder to do that in a 13-game season, is my point. So, but yeah. I could see it happening. So I'm not ready to go to like 1 or 0. But it's low. It would be a surprise. It would be a big surprise to see that. It would.
Well, I mean, when was the last time Notre Dame had 2,000-yard receivers in the same year?
It'd have been 05.
05, yeah. I was about to say it had to be like the Brady Quinn, right? Like
they would have probably done it twice in Leighton Charlie's era if Michael Floyd doesn't get hurt in 08 and 09, especially 09.
Yeah.
If 09, if Michael Floyd doesn't get 08 might have been a little tougher, but in both years 08 and 09, Michael Floyd was Jimmy Clausen's number 1 receiver until he got hurt. And Golden had a monster year in 09. And Floyd still got somewhat close to 1,000 yards that year. He still finished with 795, but he only played 7 games. I mean, if he plays 12 games, they're both over 1,000. So I mean, but those were 2 stars. I mean, that was Michael Floyd and Golden Tate. I don't know if there's that kind of 1-2 punch in the room right now, especially since Tobias is only a sophomore. So it would surprise me, but yeah, you'd have to go back to Stovall and Samardzija back in 05, and I think that's the only time it's ever happened, actually.
Wait, wasn't the next year? Didn't Samardzija and Rima do it? No,
Rima was in the 900s. Now Rima had a bunch of touchdowns. He had like 15 touchdowns or something. Yeah, but Rima never got to 1,000, partly because his yards per catch was way down. He was at 907 on 67 catches because he was only at 13 and a half yards per catch. But that year, Ryan, they had 3 guys go over 600 because John Carlson had over 600 as well. So that was the other thing, too, is part of the reason that Rama didn't get to 1,000 also is because of how good John Carlson was.
He was a really good player, man. John Carlson was a good football player.
Now, you had Anthony Fasano the year before, but Anthony Fasano had 100 fewer yards than John Carlson, or about 70. Well, you take those yards and you put them into Rama, and all of a sudden Rama's got a better chance to get to 100 or get to 1,000. So that's part of it too. Now, I don't think that the tight end position is going to produce as much as John Carlson did that year. But I also think there's going to be more spread out because when you look at those seasons, Ryan, like the 05 season, you had Samardzija had 1,249. Stovall had 1,149. They were both over 16 yards a catch. And that was huge. And then you had Fasano at 576. Well, then you had 2 guys over 300, and then nobody else got to 100. Darius Walker was at 351, Matt Sheldon was at 329, and then the next highest guy was Rashawn Powers-Neal at 90. I don't see any scenario where there's only 5,
Who was a fullback?
And didn't play the whole season. Yeah. Only played 5 games. The next receiver was Rama at 69, who only played 2 games, and then the next guy was John Carlson at 56. Right? So the point is, this year, I'll be shocked if there's only 5 guys with over 100 yards receiving this year. Shocked. And so, that's one of those things that factors in as well is that part. Is I just think, to Ryan's point, because Ryan, you said this earlier, I think the ball is just going to get spread around a lot more. Yeah. Ryan, even this year, as bad as the offense was and how few, they still had 8 different guys catch over 100 yards. And so I don't see any scenario where that doesn't happen next year. So to Ryan's point, the ball is just going to get spread around, in my opinion, a lot more than it did then. So they'd have to be an insanely explosive offense to have all of that. 2 guys over 1,000 yards. And could it happen? Sure. But that's one heck of a jump, Ryan. You're talking about like an LSU 2019 borderline jump from what they were last year to that. And I just don't see it.
Hope it happens, though.
It'd be great. I mean, it'd be great. And like, you could point to say, well, hey, look, Sam Hartman in 2021 threw for 4,000 yards. He had 2,000-yard receivers on that team. Another guy with 600 yards, another guy with 400 yards, another guy with 300 yards. You say, well, Sam Hartman's done that before. True. But they rushed for 160 yards a game. Had 1 guy over 600 yards rushing. That's just, Notre Dame's not going to be that team. They're not going to be a 160-yard rushing per game team. If that happens, Ryan, something went really wrong. like really wrong. And so it's just not going to be the case. So you're just not going to see the opportunity for him to get to that level because this team's just going to run the ball more and more effectively. No, so it'll be, okay, well, then get the yards per catch up more, right? And so then you look at the receiving yards in that 2021 season. You know, you had Jakari Roberson was 15.2, and then A.T. Perry was at 18.2. And they also played 14 games, right? So again, it was a little bit of a different situation. And so, but the other thing too is how good he is throwing the football is where I could see part of it too. Because if you can throw the football down the field, you don't need as many catches to get to 100 yards. And in a 13-game season, you know, you don't need to average 100 yards a game to get to 1,000. You only need to average 76.9. Well, there's going to be some games where Tobias or Lorenzo or Dion gets that in 2 catches. You know what I mean? But can they do that consistently? Can 2 guys do that consistently? I hope so, but I don't see it. Be nice. It'd be fun to watch, Ryan. That's for sure.
It'll be definitely fun to watch.
Because I'll say this though. Here's the question: what's your scale of 1 to 10, Ryan, on Notre Dame winning a championship if they have 2,000-yard receivers this year?
Like 7, 8.
Yes.
Pretty high. It's pretty high. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's high.
Yes. 100%. 100% agree. Oh goodness. Broke Neck Boy has a question for me. Says, how would you get back to watching the Broncos if they sign Sean Payton? Probably not, because the roster still stinks. I think Sean Payton's a bit of an overrated coach. I think he's a good coach, Ryan, but I think he doesn't have Drew Brees a quarterback, with all due respect to Russell Wilson.
Also, you have to give up a lot to give Sean Payton, right? Because he's under contract with New Orleans, so you have to give up draft capital.
Well, they're talking about how the Saints are asking for 2 first-round picks. Well, even if you get down to 1, that means what? You're giving up 3 first-rounders for Russell Wilson and Sean Payton? Okay, so you have a big-name coach and a big-name quarterback with no high-level draft picks. Okay, whatever. I did something pop in my head when you were talking, though, Ryan, earlier, that kind of goes back to a conversation we were having in the regular portion of the show about why volume's important. And people say, you know, you drafted a DN in the first round. Why'd you draft another one in the third round? Well, because we have depth needs and because we're taking the best player. It's kind of like you look at the Redskins the year they drafted Heath Schuler and Gus Frerotte.
Oh, I thought you were going to go RG3 and Kirk Cousins.
Well, that's another one. But when you had Heath Schuler was like, what, the number 2, number 3 somewhere overall pick, and then you draft Gus Frerotte in 7th round. Well, you drafted 2 quarterbacks. You just increase your odds that one of them becomes a starting caliber quarterback. Now, neither of them were very good, but who was the guy that was the better quarterback out of that tandem? It was Gus Frerotte. And so, you know, that's kind of why you do it, is because, hey, look, we're going to get as many talented kids as we possibly can. And the odds are that somebody's going to step up and be a dude.
Similar situation, Brian. I'm going to ask you a small trivia question. It's not that much of a trivia question, really. Troy Aikman's rookie year, he did not win a single football game. The Cowboys went 1-15 that year. Do you know who the only victory was that year? Only victorious quarterback that year?
I believe it was Steve Walsh, wasn't it?
Fellow rookie quarterback Steve Walsh, who was a draft pick with Troy Aikman as well.
Right.
Yes.
And the funny thing is they beat the Redskins.
Is that who they beat?
Pretty good that year. Yes. My dad still is upset about that game, if we're going to be honest about it. Yes. I'm actually going to find out because Steve Walsh was drafted low that year, right?
Very low.
He was a supplemental pick that offseason. So he was actually a first-round supplemental pick that they had. But they had a first-round pick to give up because they had the trade with Herschel Walker, I believe, at that time. But yes, you are correct. Steve Walsh was the starting quarterback on that. So I got that one right. Or no, I was correct. I got that one right.
You did get it right.
But that was in 89, right, Ryan?
Believe so. Sounds right.
So I believe let me go look at what the Redskins were in 1989. Yeah, they were a 10-6 team. So
they went 1-15.
They lost to the 1-15 Dallas Cowboys. Yes, and they had beaten Dallas 30-7 earlier in the year at Dallas. They lost 13-3 at home in that game.
13-3.
Yeah.
Yuck.
Yeah. Of course, the next week they go out and beat the Broncos. So it's like, 2 weeks later they go out and beat the Broncos. But and then the funny thing is, the next week after losing at home to the 1-15 Dallas Cowboys, the very next week they went on the road and beat Philadelphia, who that year went 11-5 and actually made the playoffs. And then the next week they actually lost to the Broncos, excuse me, I got that one wrong. And then the next week they went out and beat the Bears. So, it was kind of like, how do you lose that game, right? Like, how do you lose to that team? Here's another funny stat. Do you know who the 5 teams in the NFC East were that season? Obviously, it's the Giants, the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the Redskins. Do you know who the other NFC East team was on that? It's almost as dumb as college football now. It's the Phoenix Cardinals, or the other NFC East team. Like, east of what? Hawaii? Like, what constitutes east in this situation?
That's funny.
But yes, it was the Phoenix Cardinals. I saw that. I remember that. I remember that now. And talk about how good the quarterback play was in the 80s. The fact that nobody knows almost nobody knows, unless the diehards or older people like us know who Neil Lomax was.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because there were just so many good quarterbacks back then. That dude had a 4,000-yard season back in the 80s. You know what I mean? Like, that guy had some really good years, but there's just so many good quarterbacks back then that people forgot about.
Even before that, I think it was more in like the 70s. The Cardinals were a terrible team, but they had Jim Hart, who my dad still swears that if Jim Hart was on a good team, he would have been the man, you know?
Yeah. Well, I've heard people make that about Archie Manning, that if Archie Manning would have gone to a better program, he might have been one of the best ever. I've heard people make that argument before. I mean, I think he was still a Hall of Famer, wasn't he?
I don't think so.
He was maybe just a college Hall of Famer then?
Probably.
But certainly a well-known guy. Let me look it up. I thought Arch went there.
He has some of the
He's just a college football Hall of Fame. Yeah.
He has some of the most fun highlights ever, though. Even throw stuff underhanded,
just running for his life. Yeah, it's bad. Bad. Here's another question from John Murray. Says, "Good day, IB." Same to you, John. If the ground has been gained in the areas of releasing, running precise routes, and having an aggressive attitude about going after the ball, some of the athletic ability should show. I think that's the big thing, John. That's a great comment, Brian. That's why technique is so important, because when the technique is there and it's taught and it's muscle memory, they don't have to think about it. Now it's just your talent takes over, right? Like when Jerry Rice was in his prime, he wasn't thinking about, okay, I'm going to stem this guy up this way, and when I get to my top, I'm going to do this. And he just knew. It's just instinctive. Like, you'd done it so much, like it's like great basketball players, right? I mean, the after a while, like the crossover for Bubba Chuck was just kind of a part. It's like, I got it. I see your leverage, and I just, bam, it's just instinctual. I go to it. If you have to think about it, then a lot of times you're not going to go there. It's got to be a feel. But that comes over. I mean, do you know how many crossovers that Allen Iverson did in his career practicing? I know he didn't like to practice in a formal structure, but Allen Iverson liked to play like the ball. You know how many times Larry Bird attempted those crazy passes where in practice where it didn't work out because you know your boundaries. It becomes a feel. We've practiced so much together. I know where you're going to be. I have to see you. And it's the same thing with an individual player. It's like, I'm not thinking about, like, if you're at the free throw line thinking about your technique, you're not going to be very good free throw because it's in your head now. You're just up there. This is my rhythm. Bam, 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 bam. It's in, right? You can see when a guy's struggling as a free throw shooter. Why? Because you see it's mechanical. Because why? He's thinking about it.
Yes.
And now it's like, now you're in trouble. And same with great receiver. It just has to be a feel, right? And the thought process of how I'm going to attack this guy is worked on during the week of practice to where you have a mental acceptance of where this guy is. But then after that, it's just, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm doing this. And to your point, John, when it gets to that level, you're just out there being athletic, and that's when this group becomes really, really good because the talent is there. It really is. Now, is there a Quentin Johnston in the room? Is there a guy like that? Is there a Mike Williams in the room? No, I don't think so. Not right now, anyway. I don't think there's a Mike Williams 2016 Clemson guy in the room, Ryan. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that. I don't. But there is a deep group of receivers, and that to me is just as good as a team that has one great guy and a bunch of okay guys. And so Clemson 2016, Ryan had a receiver that's better than what Notre Dame has. They did. Mike Williams in 2016 will have been better than anybody that Notre Dame has. But to me, I'll take the rest of it. Jordan Leggett, Deion Kane, Artavis Scott, Hunter Renfrow, Ray McLeod. Those are all good players. Deion Kane could have been better than he was. But I think Notre Dame could be every bit as good, if not better, in those spots is where I think that they can be or where they need to be. And so those are the different ways you can have a great receiving corps. It's a bunch of really good guys or one star that just can take games over. And I would like to have both. I'd love to have a star and then a bunch of really, really good players.
Yes.
I just don't know if that guy's on the roster yet. Maybe Tobias could get there down the road, but Mike Williams is a pretty freaky dude. I mean, he really was. Especially after coming back from the neck injury. I didn't think he was ever going to be the same after what happened to him in 2015. Do you remember that? Did you ever see that hit that he took, Ryan?
Yep.
That's one we're like, dude, I don't know if that guy ever dives for a ball again. Like after that. That's scary. That's really scary.
It's really scary.
Whew, goodness gracious. All right, let's get to some more here, Ryan. I'm from Coleman Smith. Coleman says, what is both of your comps for Lorenzo Styles and freshman Caleb Smith? Mine for Lorenzo is Stephon Diggs, and Caleb Smith, to me, is a faster version of Lad McConkey. All right, Ryan, so let's say, what is your comp for Lorenzo?
I mean, I don't think I really have a great one. I mean, I'm trying to think through my mind. I mean, my mind's going to, all right, he's a sleek kid, kind of wiry. He's pretty smooth kid, has pretty good explosiveness for his size. I mean, who's that guy? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to work through guys that would be decent comparisons. I don't really have one.
Let's go with Caleb Smith, because I do know you. I'm pretty sure you had one for him during our kind of our recruiting period. I thought you had one for him as well.
I can't remember who it was though.
Mine was Chris Olave. I think he's got a lot of Chris Olave in him. But maybe a little bit more after the catch, but not quite as top ends fast. But just really smooth, very sudden athlete, similar body type, and the ball skills are similar. Because I was surprised at how fast Chris Olave was. But one of the things I always liked about Chris Olave, and he's been better as a pro than I thought he would be, Ryan, looking at his stats. But one of the things for me that I look at and I see about him is he is a great pass catcher, meaning he attacks the football. He's got supreme confidence in his hands, and he can do a lot of good things. And when I look at that, I see a lot of that in Caleb Smith. He just has he just always attacking the football, going after the football, very clean hands. He's going to be a very sharp, precise route runner. Is he as good as Chris Olave? No, but style of play wise, I see a similarity. You know who a guy that I could see as being a comp for Lorenzo Styles, Ryan? I'm going to say this, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, because it's not a perfect comp, because as you know, I'm not really great at comps. I don't love comps. But a guy that just kind of sticks out in my mind as a comparable player is De'Ami Brown from North Carolina. Kind of similar body type, 6 foot, 6'1", 195 range, good vertical speed, smooth, but maybe not overly sudden, and very similar body type. I think Lorenzo is not a shaky, make you miss guy. He is a fast guy, a smooth, fluid, fast guy, but not a guy that's going to catch a bubble screen and make a couple quick, sudden moves. He's a little clunky in that type of scenario, but he's a guy that can catch a screen, find a crease, and hit it with vertical speed and be fast, in my view. And I kind of felt that way about De'Ami Brown a little bit too, Ryan. I don't know what you think of that comp.
It's interesting because obviously De'Ami was used as kind of more of a vertical player at North Carolina, because that's kind of how Phil Longo employed him. What's kind of funny, though, is now I'm thinking of that offense. I'm like, this Caleb Smith had a little Daz Newsome in him, maybe a little bit bigger, but kind of has some of that slot stuff, can be a little creative in space. But I kind of like the De'Ami Brown one, honestly, because their body types are also very similar. They're both 6 foot, 6.5 foot, 6'1", somewhere in that ballpark, and little lanky, but have a wiry frame where you're kind of he probably is a little stronger than what he actually looks like, type of thing. So I could get there with that one. That's definitely better than what I have, because I don't have a good comp for him right now. So
all right, let's go to Irish Blooded. He says, with a healthier running back room, do you think Chris Tyree plays more in space and screen games with a better, hopefully improved blocking wide receiver group? And is that better for Tyree?
I think, is that better? I would say yes.
It's better than what they did last year.
Yes, comparative.
It's not the ideal scenario for Chris Tyree. I still think Chris Tyree is better getting the ball as a runner. He's more dangerous as a runner than he is as a receiver. That's why I've been against the whole slot thing. But here's the deal. Chris Tyree cannot be a duo guy. That's not his game. He is an inside-outside counter guy. And if you go back to 2020, what was Notre Dame's 3 base plays, Ryan? They ran inside zone, outside zone, and counter. That was it. And Chris Tyree, what did he hit big runs off of? Counter against Florida State, and they hit big runs on inside zone. But it's because you'd shown teams that you were willing to go here. So when he went here, but he was able to cut those suckers back. And I think that's more geared to his game. If you're going to play him as a running back, and they should still keep him as a running back, he's got to be an outside zone, inside zone counter guy that also is used in the pass game. That's what you need to do with him. And then the pass game becomes more effective that way, where, Chris Tyree only needs 6 to 7 carries a game to rip off 50 yards. And then he catches 2-3 balls for 30, 35 yards. And then occasionally he's going to rip off a big home run. But so I still believe using him as a runner, which means not putting him in space in the screen games primarily, those need to be complementary pieces to him being a runner, but you're just going to have to use him in the runs that his game is better suited for, in my opinion. That's what I think.
I think regardless, though, whether it's in the run or the pass game, you do have to be more creative with how you use Chris Tyree, because I think that there was no creativity to it at all. You're just like, this is what we do well as an offense. And despite Chris Tyree at 190-something pounds being more of a outside zone type of runner, inside zone type of runner, I'm going to force him to being a power back, right? Like that, I think that was an ill use of talent. So regardless of whether we're talking about how to utilize him in the pass game or the running game, I think that there needs to be, we talked about diversity all year of the run game, but diversity in the run game is especially true towards a guy like a Chris Tyree, because that's not a just work him downhill consistently, he's going to break a ton of tackles type of runner. Like that's not who Chris Tyree is. You want to manipulate a little bit of space, whether it's in the run game or the pass game, because you want to work him into scenarios where it's not easy to predict, right? Like I don't want to predict 100% of where Chris Tyree is. If we're just running him as a duo runner, it's not utilizing his talent the best way possible. So there needs to be more diversity to how you use him in general, because there is a lot more that you can get out of him. I mean, he should not be a kid that's averaging just a hair over 4 yards a carry on a season. Like that should not be who Chris Tyree is. And that's what you relegated him to.
And that's not him. That's on you. As
Exactly.
a coach, you're not using him the way his game needs to be used, in my opinion. And that tells me you're just playing him because he's the veteran, because you feel you need to. You're not actually playing to his strengths. And I think that's the big thing for me is I want to see Coach Reese become a guy that's a little bit better at, yes, you have your offense, but you need to tailor your offense to fit your specific talent. And either don't play Chris Tyree at all, use him only as a pass game weapon, or if you're going to use him as a key part of your offense, then use him to what he does well. Yeah. Those are my things, right? It's the same thing with Logan Diggs. Like if Chris, let's say Chris Tyree was the dude and you're running outside zone and counter all game long with him, and then you bring Audric Estime in and you're going to do the same thing. It's like, I don't know if this is the ideal scenario for using him at this point in time. And so like it'd be the same argument there. You have to have enough versatility. And that's what I was so excited about in the bowl game, because we saw so much run game versatility from Coach Reese in the bowl game. I was like, okay, if he can carry this into the next year, I don't know how you stop this run game. Because you can slow it down early, but then if other stuff is going, the bootlegs, the RPOs, all the – because Tyler Buckner was hitting RPOs in that game, right? I mean, he was. If you can get that, the play actions and the RPOs and the quarterback run game or whatever, if depending on who your quarterback is going, and you're showing versatility in your scheme, I don't know how you defend that team. And the fact is South Carolina couldn't. Right? I mean, everybody talks about how good Jordan Burch is, and he's going to Oregon and arguably the biggest defensive guy on the board. Notre Dame put up 45 points and 558 yards against that guy. Right? So, wow, they were missing some guys. Yeah, so was Notre Dame. Right? And so that's the thing is, but when you show that versatility where you're going to attack outside and inside, you can't defend this offense for 4 quarters. You just can't. And I thought that's what really helped against Clemson too, Ryan, is, again, the offense wasn't brilliant against Clemson. The run game was brilliant against Clemson. I mean, Reese was on top of his game, and you couldn't really do a whole lot throwing the football because of how windy. It was like 34-mile wind gusts. But his ability to then get outside with the run game and with the quick screens early with Chris Tyree really put Clemson on its heels and allowed them to be successful. It was impressive to me. It was impressive. All right, let's get to the next one here, Ryan. Here's an interesting one I'll ask to you there, Mr. Roberts. Jordan Schreiber asks, prediction, is the 24 recruiting receiver class better than the 23 receiver recruiting class at the end of the day? His answer is yes, Ryan. And I assume he means how they sign, right? So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
It's possible. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, there's extremely talented players that are already on the board, and you already have a early commitment from Cam Williams. And if the class ended today, Cam Williams would be the highest rated recruit out of the two classes, right? As far as wide receivers go. I mean, I forget if it was 247 or On3 has him as the number 20 ranked player in the class, right? So Cam's a legit dude. Like, he's a really talented football player. But then you also have the opportunity to get a Ryan Wingo, hopefully, a Jeremiah McClellan, a Josiah Brown, a Breedell Richardson. Like, there's a lot of really, really talented Emmett Mosley. There's a lot of really talented wide receivers on the board. So, I mean, Jordan, yeah, can it happen? Could they be better?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. I think that you do have a good possibility because you have a great baseline already in Cam, and I think you're in a pretty decent position with a couple of them already. But it's all going to depend on if you can close on the elite talent. Because, I mean, we're talking about the sunshine and rainbows, but there's also the possibility that you lose out on a couple of those guys.
Correct.
So I do think that you have a good chance to have a better group, but it's going to take a lot of closing. There's no doubt.
Yeah, and I will say this. I don't feel as good right now about Notre Dame closing on those guys as I feel about how they finished in last year's class. I don't feel like, okay, they're going to land this guy, this guy, this guy. I feel good about it. And so, but I also, at this time a year ago, we weren't talking about Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James being locks to Notre Dame.
No.
We weren't talking about Rico Flores hardly at all, and I had no clue who Caleb Smith was at this time. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of, and this is when people start getting where, they're just not going to do
we were just talking about Carnell Tate this time of year.
Yeah.
Right?
Hoping that they would get him. Right. And guys like him. So I look at it and I say, hey, look, let's let this play out a little bit. But with where things stand now, if I had to predict today, I will not predict that Ryan Wingo picks Notre Dame. Do I think Notre Dame's in it? Absolutely. Do I think they have a shot? Absolutely. If I had to make a pick today, would it be Notre Dame? Wouldn't. And so, I don't know if they're in as strong of a position now as with Jeremiah McClellan as they were 6 months ago. Breedell Richardson's a really talented player, likes Notre Dame a lot, but he's from Florida, and I never feel good about kids from Florida until they sign. I'm just going to be honest with you. And so there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of closing needs to be done. I don't feel great about it, but there's certainly the potential this early. I mean, of course. I mean, you go out and get Emmett Mosley and Ryan Wingo and Breedell Richardson, and I'm with Cam Williams, and I'm like, yeah, that's based on what those guys were as juniors, because we can only compare them for where they were as juniors. That group in 24 would be better than the group in 23 based on their juniors. Now, I thought Rico showed me a lot more as a senior.
Yes.
I thought that Braylon James made a big jump as a senior. I thought Caleb Smith had a jump as a senior. So these guys now there are some other guys that didn't have jumps as a senior. There's some receivers I've watched that I liked as juniors that I didn't like as much as seniors. Not for Notre Dame, I'm talking just nationally as I'm putting my top 100 together. But yeah, that guy didn't make the jump I'd hope he would make. And so there's always that. But for me, it's the potential. But it's always going to be – the potential is always going to be there this early, Ryan. Will the potential be there in July? That's the bigger question. And they're going to have to make a move between now and July if they're going to want to finish with that group. Because I don't know if I could say if they land the class, if they landed a 3-man receiver core that I predict they could land today based on who I think they're leading for today, it won't be as good as last year's, in my opinion. Now, you may feel differently because you may think they lead for some guys, but I don't predict Ryan Wingo to Notre Dame right now. I don't predict Micah Hudson. I don't predict those elite players right now to Notre Dame. I don't predict the TJ Moore, who may not be ranked high, but that is a freak, right? I don't predict those guys to Notre Dame right now. I predict I don't even know if I would feel great predicting Emmett Mosley to Notre Dame right now, a receiver. There's work to be done. It's more, who would be your 3-man? If you had to say predict a 3-man receiver class, you had to pick guys that you think right now today Notre Dame leads for, what would it be?
It's a good question. I think that they're in a really good spot with Jeremiah McClellan. I think that we see that one a little bit differently.
Do you think they still lead for him right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
but you say that with a little bit more hesitancy than you would have in November. Am I correct in reading your
Maybe
tone?
A little bit. Yeah, okay. You may. Maybe a little bit.
Which is okay because they went through this about this time last year with Christian Gray, remember?
Absolutely.
So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who the third guy would be.
You're kind of answering my question, though.
Yeah.
Right? Because there isn't that guy that just pops off your head like, oh, yeah, they're going to get that guy. right?
Sure.
Like, I don't feel great about that. I wouldn't predict they're going to get Josiah Brown right now.
No.
I wouldn't predict that they're going to get, McClellan right now. Although I'll grant you that one. Who that third guy beats? Would it be Wingo? Would you predict him to go to Notre Dame today?
I think the problem with a couple of those guys, and that includes Josiah Brown and that includes Ryan Wingo even, is that I don't think they necessarily have a leader right now.
Exactly. But there's the perception of Tennessee and whatever with Wingo, but I think that's overplayed a little bit. But the point is, It's not Notre Dame, so I can't predict them to go to Notre Dame today, because even if they don't have a leader, that means it's not Notre Dame, right?
Sure.
And that's the point. Is there's a lot of work to be done with those guys.
No doubt.
And so that's going to be the thing that determines it, right? And that's where I'm coming from but it's January. You know who would you have predicted in January a year ago? Like when you first got hired, which is basically we're about a week to 2 weeks into what would have been your start here. Yeah. Were you we started to feel really good about Braylon James at this point in time, because as soon as Stuckey got in, he immediately went for Braylon James. Like, okay, they're going to be a player there. Mm-hmm. They were battling to get Jaden Greathouse on campus this time a year ago. Yep. Rico was clearly a pro Ohio State kid at this time a year ago.
Yeah.
Cardinal Tate was showing a lot of love in Notre Dame, but we always kind of felt like, I don't know about that one. Right. So the class they ended up getting 23, we wouldn't have been predicting them to be. Notre Dame wasn't the leader for them. At the point is, Notre Dame is in a better position today with Ryan Wingo than they were a year ago with Rico Flores and Jaden Greathouse. Would you agree with that?
Easily. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also can't predict them, because I wouldn't have predicted Jaden Greathouse in Notre Dame a year ago at this time. It took time to close the deal on them. And that's what we're saying. Is we're not saying they're not going to get those guys. Just I don't know who that guy's going to be right now. And that's where Coach Stuckey's got a chance to go prove himself. It's like, okay, you're in the game for these guys. Now go get them. And that's going to be the key. And I don't even know if I even know what my dream class would be, Ryan.
Someone asked us that yesterday on the podcast.
Yeah, I know it's going to be Ryan Wingo, but I don't know. I don't know if it's definitely Jeremiah McClellan or definitely Emmett Mosley or definitely, because I start watching film with TJ Moore and I'm like, I might have to look at that guy a little bit. You know what I mean? Like there's some dudes still on the board, and I'm like,
I like Josiah Brown, man.
Yeah, he's a pretty good player. He's a pretty good player. So that's the thing is like, it's not you got to get these three or it's no bueno. There's a group right now. Breedell Richardson's a really good player. It'd be hard for me to say no to him. The point is there's some really good guys on the board, and that's the encouraging thing. I don't know who they're going to get. I don't know who they lead for right now. And you said Notre Dame leads for Jeremiah McClellan. You think the point is it's not a clear, like, okay, like so there's some players on the board, right, and we're like, okay, I'll be shocked if they don't get that guy.
Yeah. There's
nobody like that receiver. But the point is they're in the game for a lot of really good players. They only need 2 of them. That's it. They only need 2 more of them. And so that's the opportunity that Coach Stuckey has. So really good question, Jordan. Really,
I love when we start spouting about NIL and Ryan Wingo in the chat.
I know, right?
Always my favorite.
Yep. Here's a question, Ryan. Here's a good one from Tommy Guns. How much of the game, in your opinion, is mental versus physical?
It's 100% mental, 30% physical, Tommy.
And I did not hire Ryan for his math skills.
Seriously though, it's actually, like you want an exact percentage, right, Tommy? But like, I don't think it's the same for everyone. Like, I really don't, because there's some players that can win more off of physical ability than they can on the mental side of things, right? And then there's also positions that you need more mental capacity than a comparative to another position, right? So I think it varies from not only from position to position, but player to player. But I do think regardless of what position you play, the mental side is the separator from the great players. At the end of the day, that's the biggest thing. So if you ask me quarterback, I think it's mostly a mental position. But then there's obviously you still need the physical traits, but that's going to be different than an offensive lineman comparative to a linebacker, comparative to a defensive end. I just think it varies from position to position. I really do.
I will say this too, Ryan. It depends on what day of the week we're talking. And are we talking college versus NFL or high school? In high school, it is like 90% physical and 10% mental. If you're just a freaky athlete, you're going to be a good high school football player. I don't care how little you know about the game. In college, it ramps up a little bit more, and in the pros, it's a very mental game in the NFL. I mean, it's
Yes.
the need for mental strength in the NFL from a knowledge and technical standpoint is far greater. You see it all the time. You see guys that are a great offensive linemen in college because they're just big, long, and fast and powerful. Then they go to the NFL and they suck. Why? Because it's not about because everybody's big, long. Exactly. You got to know how to play the game. You have to have a feel for the game. And so it's a different thing. For college, Ryan, to me, it's Monday to Friday. It's 70% mental, 30% physical. On Saturday, it's flipped because the mental has to just kind of already be built into your body. It has to be built into your physical ability to go produce. And that's what we talked about before. It's the muscle memory, right? It's I've prepared you so much mentally that you're just reacting, not thinking.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt this in practice, 70-30 mental to physical. On Saturday, it's 30-70 mental to physical. Because it's different times of the week where the mental becomes more important. And if you're having to think and do the work on the mental stuff in practice on Saturday, that means you didn't do the work during the week, and the physical is going to suffer for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yep.
Here's an NFL draft question here for you, Ryan, from Brent Smith. He goes, Brandon Joseph should have returned for another year. He may go undrafted or a 6th, 7th round pick at best. Any thoughts? So let's go reverse order here, Ryan. First thoughts on where you think he's going to get drafted and whether or not you think he should or should not have returned to Notre Dame, which I don't even know if he could have returned to Notre Dame, to be completely honest with you.
Well, I mean, I put out a piece on him last week, and I mean, from everything I'm hearing, Brent, I don't think we're too far off, right? I honestly do not think that he's going to go undrafted. I think he's more a mid to late day 3 player at this point. You know, he's going to have an opportunity to go to the East West Shrine Bowl out in Las Vegas, which I think is going to be a big opportunity for him. And I think if he's able to show some of the ball skills, proactiveness, and pass coverage that he has in not in spurts. I mean, kid has 10 career interceptions. So like he's done it a ton, right? Like it wasn't like it was just like 2 interceptions that you're just putting your hat on. Like he's turned the ball over a ton during his career. But I think that in the 4th, 5th round, they start talking about it, and then somewhere on day 3 it happens. Ultimately, I mean, I once thought that he might be a back end of the 1st round type of player, 2nd round type of player, and that ship has just sailed for me, just because I just don't think he's taken a step over the last couple of years. And this past year, just with the injuries and everything, also he has to answer, and the medical is going to be a conversation. I think he's a mid to late day 3 pick at this point. I hope he gets back to his 2020 form. I do, because I still think that there are ball skills there. I still think that there is good instincts there. It's just been maddeningly inconsistent over the last 2 years, to say the least.
Agree. Let's go down here to some more. We got some really good questions here today. I'll go down here. I'll find this one. All right, here we go from Irish in Ohio. He asks, I'm assuming it's a he, probably should. Is it fair to say one of the best things, if not the best thing, to happen to the receiver room is signing Hartman? Well, I'm going to say no, just because I don't care who they had at quarterback if they had the same position coach as the past.
Sure.
It wouldn't have mattered. They'd have been limited. It's the best thing to happen since they hired a new position coach. How about that? How does that sound, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Because, again, I go back to some of the more talented players in the room for Notre Dame or the bigger body guys at this point. And I think that for Sam Hartman, that really fits into their profile, right? Like, I think that is going to be big time. And then even for the players, the slot types, the guys that more win with route running ability or athleticism, you have a proven commodity quarterback that's thrown 77 touchdowns in the last 2 years. So, I mean, you feel better about the quarterback position and just the future of that quarterback position in general. And I think that that's going to be big beneficiaries, because I do think that the wide receiver group is much more talented than what they showed in 2022. It's just about kind of the maturation process and the trust between the rooms, I think, too.
Absolutely. We got one here from Kyle Wade. Kyle asks, who is your trees package again? You going big in the slot for that package too, or just the shifty, most agile guys regardless? I mean, honestly, Kyle, my trees package for me would be my starting lineup. It'd be Tobias at X, which is the field outside position. It'd be Jaden Thomas in the slot, who's 6'1.5", 6'2", 210, 215. Tobias is 6'4". He'll be over 200 by the time next year starts. And then my W, which is the boundary position, is Deion Colsey, who's 6'5", 210. and then whoever at tight end. That's I mean, it's not my trees package. That's my starting lineup.
That's your package. Right.
And then I'm rotating Lorenzo in a different spots. I mean, that's for me where I see it going, unless Lorenzo can get out of his own way and really step up this offseason. But yeah, my trees package is called my starting lineup. It's a good question, but like that's where I think that, and I think that also part of the reason why, Ryan, is not just I think those are the project to be the 3 best players, but it's also about I think that trio best complements the run game and also complements Sam Hartman's and Tyler Buckner's skill set the best. Because Tyler Buckner will never be a pinpoint precision passer. He'll never be Mac Jones. And so because he's such a gunslinger and I want to give him the biggest catch radius players as possible. Same with Sam Hartman. Now, he's a little bit more accurate than Tyler as a 5th-year senior. I mean, he should be. But he's also a guy that likes to take chances. And if I have a guy that's like that and I have a run game like Notre Dame has, I want big catch radiuses on the field. Radii. I don't know what the plural is for radius. That's what I'm just going to say, radiuses. And if there's an English person in here, the difference, then you can let me know what the proper plural term is for a radius. But that's what I'm wanting. I want as much catch range, catch radius, whatever you want to call it.
Square
I want
footage.
as much as possible, right? For the team because of the run game and because of the nature of the quarterbacks. I think that's ideal. That doesn't mean there's not a role for other players. There absolutely is. But that's for me with my starting lineup. It's that combination of look, because like here's the deal, right? If a 5'11" guy is your best player, I don't give a crap about catch radius. Put him in the game. It's a combination of best talent, complement the run game, complement the quarterback style of play. Is the order in which I put those guys on the field for me.
The wide receiver group is going to be stupid big next year, man. I mean, because Caleb Smith, the younger one coming in, is a little bit of a smaller guy, right? I mean, I think he's listed like 170 pounds, give or take, somewhere in there. But, I mean, you have 6'5", 210, like you said, Deion Coles. You got 6'4" Tobias. You have 6'1" something, 215, and a guy like a Jaden Thomas. You have Jaden Greathouse coming in, who's going to be 6'1 plus, 210 plus pounds. You got 6'3" Braylon James. Rico Flores, I stood next to, is a legit 6'1.5". Probably 190 pounds at this point. The smallest wide receiver that you're going to have in your rotation potentially next year, barring, and Caleb Smith, the older one, is like 6'2", 220, right? So he's massive as anything too. So if Caleb Smith, the younger one, is not able to crack the rotation next year, your smallest wide receiver is going to be 6'1", 190 something. Like that's going to be your smallest receiver. That is a wildly big offense, wide receiver room. I mean, there's some years, Brian, where like the rotation 6'1" something, 190 something is one of your bigger guys, and all of a sudden that's your smallest dude. So, I mean, to Kyle's question, I would say every package is the tree package with this group, man. Cause it's like if you take Jaden Thomas out, it's like, okay, Jaden Greathouse go in. That's another big guy. Like go this guy. Like it's
Braylon James. Right.
6'3", yeah, Braylon James.
Cam Williams is going to be that way next year. 6'1.5", 6'2", long arms, Yes. And like you talk about, like it's got to fit the quarterback too. Like Jimmy Clausen didn't need trees because Jimmy Clausen could put the ball wherever the heck he wanted. I mean, he was the real version of Vince Vaughn in Wedding Crashers. You remember what he said? He's like, hey, can you throw in there? He's like, hey man, I was first team All-State. I can put the ball wherever I want it. Right? Like, well, okay, dude, you're a high school quarterback. That's not true. But it was funny. It was a great line. But like for Jimmy Clausen, that was true. Like, dude, I can put the ball wherever I want it, right? Like, Brady Quinn was not that kind of guy. Brady Quinn was more of a playmaker, a gunslinger. He was never the most like precise quarterback on stuff that had to be on a line. Now Brady had great accuracy, I thought, on like back shoulders and goal routes and stuff like that. But like 20 and in, Brady wasn't always the most accurate guy. He tended to throw high. He would so think of some of the catches that Samardzija and Stovall made over the middle of the field where they're just like they needed every bit of their 70-something, whatever, close to 80-inch ring spans or whatever the case may be. And then also Brady knew that they had the great range. So then he would sometimes put those passes high on purpose. And so to me, that's a great compliment to the run game. But like Brady needed those kind of trees because that just fit his skill set. And then you put his skill set with those players, and boy, you got a great combination because you've got a winner, a guy that's really smart, a guy that's going to battle, a guy that's going to take some chances with Brady, combined with players that fit his skill set, and you've got some great stuff. And then like Rama wasn't that big, but But Rama had great hands when he wasn't, let's say downfield stuff. He had some drops against USC in 06, but I kind of felt like he was playing like not overly aggressively. But I mean, you look at some of the catches he made against like Michigan State in the rain, and it's phenomenal catches. But he had a pretty big catch radius for a smaller guy.
Yep.
And Brady knew that. So, but you couldn't do with Rama the same stuff you did with Mo Stovall. They're just different players.
Yep.
So that's why I say I really like the idea of the big boys.
And I mean, in the tree package too is, you can include, if you want to detach a guy like a Holden Stace at times, or an Eli Raritan when he gets back healthy, right? Like those guys can kind of do some stuff even as big slots as well, if that's kind of what you're working towards. So there's a lot of options for Notre Dame as far as getting size on the field, man. A lot of options.
Right. Absolutely. Jason Smith said, who's the best route runner going to be in the wide receiver room?
I think Jaden Greathouse the day he steps on campus. I really do.
That day, I still say the guy with I still think Rico's the better route runner. I do. I think Jaden Greathouse is the better football player right now. But I think Rico's understanding of, because Jaden will do some things where you're like, he's just getting away with being bigger and better than that guy. Rico can't do that. Rico's had to become a precision route runner. And so I still think Rico's got the highest route running potential in the room. But I think Jaden Greathouse is going to be in that conversation too, Ryan. I do. He understands how to play the game. Because, again, Jaden can't get away with certain things that Tobias Merriweather could get away with, or that Braylon James can get away with, because Braylon could just outrun you. He doesn't have to know how to do certain things. He can just outrun you. Jaden Greathouse isn't that I'm just going to outrun you type of player. He's got to know how to play the game.
Yep.
And he does. I would say this. I think that Rico is the best route runner. I think Jaden has the best feel for the game. And I think maybe that's where, you kind of put that into route running. I don't. But as far as just knowing how to get open and knowing leverage and all that kind of stuff, Jaden's the best they have, in my opinion, with that kind of stuff. Certainly. Here's a question for you, Ryan. From a position group standpoint, which group do you think improves more by the end of spring, receivers or safeties?
I would say receivers for me, Tommy, actually. I kind of wrestled with that one a little bit, but because I do think that guys like Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson can take big steps this spring, potentially, like some of those guys. But I think it's wide receivers for me, because I think of what the conversation we had earlier in the show was, right? It's that the Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas group of receivers are going to get pushed a lot this spring by some younger guys, right? That's going to force them to get better every day and by the end of spring. And then ultimately there's going to be a maturation that happens between the Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Rico Flores level of player as well, because it's going to be their first spring. So by the end of the spring, I expect them to have improvements as well. So I think it's wide receiver, because I think that the young guys are going to push the older guys, and then the younger guys will just have the natural maturation from their first spring overall.
Yeah. Basically what we're saying is they have the biggest room for growth. Two things for me. They have the most need to improve, and they have more of a ceiling, which inherently is going to create more opportunity for more growth.
Yes.
But, look, the safety, the three guys coming back at safety have shown that they can be good football players together as a trio, which we saw in the bowl game last year. This receiving core has more to prove to me. And then they've got a lot more potential for growth. So I would agree with you on that one, Ryan. So I'm just laughing because Tende had said during the chat that, we were talking about what's the proper word, it's radii, is it radiuses, whatever. And Tende said, where's Vince when you need him? Because, Vince is a teacher. And I responded with, Vince was a PE teacher, man. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then Derek Calmer said, so Vince knows the radius of a dodgeball. I got to tell Vince about this one. That was a great answers. Great response there.
Awesome. I might text Vince when we're done and just say, hey, Vince, what's the radius of a dodgeball?
Or what's the proper plural for radius? Is ask him that. So actually text him that now and see if he knows. Well, because I think school's out by now. He may have the answer to that one.
Okay.
So I want to see if Vince does know the answer. So good question there, Tommy Guns. Here we got one from We Are Not Marshall. If the potential isn't realized in the receiver room from the older players, what would still entice an elite high school talent to come to Notre Dame? Track record shows lack of development, lots of transfers. The same reason that current big-time receivers are coming into the receiver room. Look, I know that people don't get this, but to a degree, it's Notre Dame. What was the track record that got Randy Moss to come and wanting to play in an option offense. It's Notre Dame, right? And so I think that you've got to have a level of production, in my opinion, to entice the elite players. There's no doubt about it. But to me, it's like if the older players don't step up and they get beat out by younger players, that could actually be more enticing to a big time player than the opposite happening, right? I think the production piece has more to do with it, and I think that last part, to me, it's the production that has a lot more to do with it than who specifically is stepping in. But here's the other part of it. If Notre Dame's got good quarterbacks in their classes and the talent's there at other positions, then the pitch is going to be, hey, that's why we need you. We need you to come in and be that guy. That can work with some players, but at the end of the day, the pitch always works better if you've got proven product. If you can show that, hey, look at our numbers, look what we did. So, but I don't think it necessarily is tied into the older players. I just think it's tied into somebody's got to step up. I don't care if it's a transfer, if it's a freshman, if it's a sophomore. I don't care. The production's got to be there from a recruiting standpoint. I just believe that the talent plus experience of the older players is such that if they pan out, then that's the maximum potential this group has for 2023. Even though I think there's more higher ceilings in the sophomore and freshman class than there is in the 2021 class, in my opinion. It's just I don't expect those guys to be their peak ceiling in year. Like, even though I think that, Braylon James may have a higher ceiling than Lorenzo Styles, I believe that wholeheartedly. If Braylon James is the best player he can be and Lorenzo Styles is the best player he can be right now, Lorenzo would be better because he's older and he's stronger and he knows the offense. In 5 years, it's Braylon, and it's not close. But that's down the road. That's a subjective. Right now in 2023, Braylon James at his peak as a freshman is going to be lower than the peak for Lorenzo Styles in his peak as a junior. Eventually, the age becomes less of a factor. Once the younger guy gets caught up, and like we've both reached our peak physically, we've both spent time in the weight room, we have the experience. Now my talent's going to take over, but it's just not there just yet, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Did Vince answer the question?
Yeah, Vince answered the question.
What did he say?
He said radii or radiuses. I like the first one.
Okay. Thanks, Vince. So somebody else said that it can be either in the chat. So, all right, here we go. Zach Philippi. Zach has a question here. Brian, in your opinion, which receiver is most likely to have 1,000 yards receiving for the 2023 season? I mean, as of today, as of today, the guy with the best chances is because Caleb Smith, because he's become the closest to it, right? I mean, he's the closest to it. Nobody else has had 400 yards yet. If we're going to talk combination of talent plus upside, plus here's the reason I go with Deion Colsey, is because he is the most natural W on the roster. He's really the only true W amongst the returners. I think Tobias is a true W. He can play W. He's not a true W. The reality is, for me, Ryan, is that if you look at this offense, the W is still the position best geared towards production. The way that Tommy runs it, the boundary receiver is still the spot where your volume guy is going to be. Would you agree with that in this offense?
Yes.
And so I think that's where if Deion right now projects to be the W. That may change, but that's the projection right now. So that's why I'd go with him. His size, his talent. He kind of started to show himself as a bit of a clutch player late in 2022. And then the nature of the W position, and especially if you're running the football effectively and you can throw. I mean, there's a ton of comebacks and back shoulders and stuff that we just didn't see them even try last year that I know Tommy Rees likes to run. Do you know how I know that? It's because it's what he did with Javon McKinley in 2020. And so I just feel like we've seen that position we saw with Kevin Austin last year in 2021 as well. When Kevin got going, he liked to throw. He's going to hit the comebacks, the stops, and the go routes, and he's going to take those shots to that W position. And you're going to have a quarterback that can make all those throws at a high level, whether it's Tyler Buckner or Sam Hartman. But again, we're projecting Sam Hartman to be starter, and I know he can hit all those throws. And wasn't that where A.T. Perry, wasn't he primarily, did they go left, right, or I always felt like he spent a lot of time in the boundary for me.
Yes.
I always felt like he did.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
So, and we saw the numbers he put up. He's at 1,000 yards each of the last 2 years. Deion Colsey and A.T. Perry are very similar players. Size, skill set, all of it. Because A.T. Perry's not a burner.
No.
And Deion's not a burner. But he didn't have to be because he doesn't – guys like A.T. Perry and Deion Colsey, this is what I've always said to quarterbacks. They're saying, well, he was covered. He's never covered. A 6'5" guy, if he's running a route where he's moving, is never covered. On an outside go route, a post route, the only way he's covered if he's double covered. But anytime a 6'5" guy like that is single covered, he's always open. You just got to know where to put the ball. I mean, that's not always true in the NFL, Ryan, but in college, I absolutely believe that. A guy like that is never covered if he's got one guy on him and he's running a movement route. A movement route means anything where he's not standing still. You can cover a 6'5" guy on a stop route or a comeback route. You can cover that. Hitch route. But a go route, a post route, an over route, stuff like that, he's never covered if it's a one-on-one in those type of routes. And that's true of Deion, in my opinion. Should be true of Deion in year 3, which also factors into why in this offense, I think he's probably the best option for that. Because I think a lot of the spreading out that we've talked about is more going to be to the field stuff. A lot of balls to the slot, a lot of balls to the outside guy. But that W still, that's the one that you say that's the primary position in the pass game. Anything to add to that, Mr. Roberts?
No, I mean, Colsey's been my pick for a couple weeks already, right? Like he's the guy that I think has the big breakout. I mean, it would be between him and Tobias Merriweather. Like those are my two guys. And again, it goes to how the offense is run typically. I mean, you mentioned obviously the success of the W in the past, but it also goes back to Sam Hartman if he's the quarterback, especially. Like I think that's outside the numbers is where he makes his living, right? Down the field, outside the numbers. And I think that those are your two best options with the size, length, catch point stuff that they are able to do. I think that those are the two most realistic options, and also we talked about earlier in the show about, maybe not needing the highest volume to be 1,000-yard receiver on the outside. I mean, Jaden Thomas could be a conversation piece, but like it's going to take him a lot more catches to get 1,000 yards than what it's going to take Tobias or Deion Colsey, right? Like, so that's kind of where my thought process goes. So I'm sticking with Deion Colsey as well for now. If Tobias Merriweather kills in the spring, maybe I'll flip-flop to Tobias train, but for now, I think it's Deion.
I dig it. Logan Thayer says, would you rather have the 2023 running back room or the 2021 running back room? Peak Kyron Williams. Do you think any of the current running backs could make a Kyron-esque leap this year? I'm just going to be honest with you. I think Notre Dame has multiple running backs with more talent than Kyron Williams.
Oh, they do.
If Kyron Williams is on the current, if Kyron Williams came in the same class as the other two sophomores, he's not the number one back.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Can I say something to what Tommy's question was earlier about the mental, physical side of things? Kyron Williams won. I mean, good all-around athlete, right, for the college level. But Kyron Williams won because of his mental capacity and his competitiveness. That's what separated Kyron Williams, man. That dude just wanted the football, and he thought it was disrespectful. People wanted to try to tackle him. Like Kyron Williams had that dog in him, for lack of a better term. But Kyron Williams was 5'9", 190 something pounds, ran 4.6, whatever he did at the combine, right? Like he's not an incredibly physically gifted player, to your point. Logan Diggs is more physically gifted. Audric Estime is more physically gifted. Chris Tyree is more physically gifted. I mean, Jadarian Price is more physically gifted.
I would argue Jabron Payne, if he's healthy, is more physically gifted. Here's the question, though. Here's the question. Well, actually, I'm going to let you finish because you may say it and I don't want to steal your thunder. So please continue. So those guys are more physical, but I felt like there was a but coming with Kyron.
No, there actually wasn't a but. I mean, because the way I look at it is, can you have is there any one player on the roster that's going to run for 1,200 yards next year, for instance, right? I mean, could it happen? Sure, but I think
3 guys doing that.
Yeah,
right.
They could, but they probably won't because you have so much depth in that room, man. Again, I mean, we're talking about a scenario where guys like Jeremiah Love, Jabron Payne, and they're going to be wrestling to try to get touches next year in the class, and they're incredibly gifted football players. So I think it comes down to depth for me, right? I mean, if Audric Estime was your bell cow number one back, could he run for 1,200 yards this season? Absolutely. Could Logan Diggs do that? Yes, I believe so.
There's such greater depth in this group, Ryan.
Exactly.
I mean, such greater depth.
That's what it comes down to for me.
And here's the other part too. Here's the only question mark as far as like the answer is easy. It's 23 running back room and end of sentence, no buts.
Yeah.
As far as like those guys being better than Kyron, they're all more talented than Kyron. All of them, Jabron Payne included, more physically talented than Kyron. They're all bigger. They're all faster. They don't fumble like he fumbled. I mean, let's be honest. He had fumbling problems at times. But here's what made Kyron legit right here.
Yes.
That dude had heart, and that kid had – Kyron Williams thought he was way better than he actually was. And I say that as a compliment. A big compliment, because he was going to give you everything you had. There have been times I watched Kyron Williams play and say he wasn't very good. But in his last 2 years in Notre Dame, I never watched a game that I can remember and felt like Kyron didn't leave it all out there. He didn't leave it all out there, and he should have left it all. I can't think of a game where I felt that way, Ryan. Maybe one pops in your head. No. And that's the thing for me is if they can play with the same heart and want to as Kyron, this running back room is going to be unbelievable because they're all more physically gifted. But Kyron wasn't a great player because of his physical. I didn't even think he had great vision, Ryan, to be honest with you. He missed swagger. A lot of cuts. It was just he had swagger, but that kid had tons and tons of heart.
Yes.
And he worked his butt off. And that's why he's in the NFL over a lot of more physically gifted running backs that have come along in college football the last 5 years. There's 150 guys that have just random number, maybe more, that have more physical talent than Kyron Williams, but they're not in the NFL right now. Why? Because that's not what makes him great. The all-around game is there, but he got to where he is because he's got tremendous heart and tremendous work ethic, and he's a smart kid too as a football player. But he's not like a natural runner. He's not like fast. He's pretty sudden. He's got some suddenness to him. But even then, his agility numbers weren't crazy.
No.
You know, he had a ton of heart, and you knew you were going to get the most you could out of Kyron Williams every night, every day. You knew that.
And you need those types of players on your team. I mean, this goes back to the swagger and competitiveness that we talked about earlier in the show, right? Like, you need those guys. I mean, Kyron Williams for 2 years was the juice of your offense. And I mean, the juice of like, who's getting you pumped up, who's showing out, who's the guy that's getting the crowd pumped up, who's that guy? That was Kyron Williams, man. You need more of that, right? Like, you need more of that swagger. I'll just say it like this, man. And again, this is no shot to Deion Colzie at all, because I just picked Deion Colzie to maybe go over 1,000 yards this year, like the most likely guy, right? If Deion Colzie plays with the swagger and the confidence level of a Kyron Williams, he's going to be one of the best receivers to play at Notre Dame in the last several years. Like, and it's just point blank period to it, man. Because you can't teach that, though, all the time. You can adopt some of that traits, but that's just something that Kyron had in him, man. Like, he just had it. He just had it. And I loved watching that kid play because like you said, he gave every single ounce of himself to Notre Dame.
Yep, absolutely. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop, this will be an easy one. Is Bronte Johnson a legit take? There's some work he's got to do to get into school, but if my understanding is if Bronte Johnson wanted to come to Notre Dame right now, they'd take him.
Yes.
That's my understanding. So, yes, I believe he's a legit take right now.
Especially a take as a talent. There's no doubt about that. It's just some stuff to figure out, obviously. Yep.
Joe Medina with a question. Joe, thank you. How much of an impact do you guys think this incoming freshman receivers will have? Is there a receiver who has a shot at becoming a starting kick returner and or punt returner? So we kind of already addressed the first part during the show. We think they're going to have an impact in several ways. One, they could have an impact as players. They could certainly work through in the rotation. And then two, we hope that they have an impact because we hope that they don't lose their swagger.
Yes.
No matter how much they're playing, because we hope that bleeds off of everybody else. So let's talk about the second part, though, Ryan, because we didn't talk about this during the show. Is there a receiver who has a shot at becoming a kick returner and or punt returner? And I think the answer to that, Ryan, is yes.
Yes.
Please explain, because I know you and I are on the same page on this one.
I mean, especially punt returner. Like, that's the one that I'm especially looking at, because for me, I mean, Caleb Smith, I think, has potential to help in punt return if the need's out there. I think Jaden Greathouse could do some stuff as a punt returner. Rico Flores, I think he could even do some stuff as a punt returner if you need him to, So I think the wide receiver, especially on punts, kick return, not quite as much. Like, I mean, could Caleb Smith do something as a kick returner? Maybe. Could they do, but I think punt return, especially for me, Joe, is one that I think you need a couple of those freshmen to at least compete for it, right? Like, because, you lost Brendan Joseph, who was a pretty good punt returner. He averaged 9.9 yards per punt, which is a pretty solid number, but you don't have a ton of known commodities on the roster. I mean, there's guys like Jaden Mickey that have experience as a punt returner, obviously at the high school level, but I think you have a couple kids in the wide receiver room that have experience as punt returners. And I think there's more questions right now as far as who that next guy is. So I think guys like Caleb and Jaden Greathouse could definitely impact the punt return unit for Notre Dame next year.
Agree. Well said. Next question from Irish Blooded. Funny question. Which has failed up better, Bill O'Brien or Lovie Smith? I'm going to say Bill O'Brien because I actually think Lovie Smith, like early in his career, did a pretty good job as defensive coordinator. I still don't understand where the Bill O'Brien love comes from. I still don't get it. Like, I don't even know how he got with the Patriots. Like,
I will say this, though. I think that, I mean, Bill O'Brien had a pretty good record with when he was at Houston, right? Like he was a pretty good he was a pretty good head coach. I think he's like one of those guys like Chip Kelly, where like he just couldn't get out of his own way, man. Right. It's like I want all control over everything.
Giving him more control, exactly.
But
he's a narcissist and a prick, so you knew that was going to happen eventually.
No doubt. I mean, and he sabotaged himself because he had a pretty good thing going there in Houston. You know, you had Deshaun Watson, and you had you had Nuke Hopkins, and you know there was a lot of good that was happening there. And then
that's a good point.
He self-sabotaged himself. I think he's been a sporadic OC since then, and he's still self-sabotaged himself, to be honest. But Lovie was a really good DC with the St. Louis Rams at the time when they went to the Super Bowl. Fantastic defensive coordinator. Went to Chicago, had some good moments, then fell down, and then he went to Illinois, and he was bad. I mean, he was just a bad head coach at Illinois, and then he gets a head coach. He should have never.
It was just a bad fit.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it was a bad fit. I mean, look, didn't Lovie take his team to a Super Bowl? You know, NFC championship game, right? Lovie as a coach has been to 3 NFC championship games and a Super Bowl as a head coach. I mean, Lovie did have some good years. Lovie coached it with the Bears for, was it 9 years? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He had 4 years where he won 10 or more games. And 9 years he took to the Bears. His record now compared to what the Bears are dealing with now, Lovie was astronomically better than what they've been dealing with since he left. Right? Mm-hmm. That's the other thing is what's the mark of how good of a coach you were is what have they done since you've left? And you fired me, right, for whatever reason. But, I mean, didn't he get fired by the Bears in 2012? Isn't that what happened?
I can't remember.
They started 7-1 and it fell to 26, and then they missed the playoffs and they fired him, right?
Sounds about right.
So, so in 2012 they fired him. He had gone 11-5, 8-8, 10-6 in his last 3 years with the Bears, right? Well, what have the Bears done since then? I mean, they replaced him with freaking Mark Trestman. Are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me?
That's CFL. That's CFL legend, Mark Trestman.
Oh my gosh! And then I give kind of John Fox. I thought got dealt the dirty hand because of what they did for him at quarterback. He went 6-10 3 13 5 11, right? And then Matt Nagy was just another disaster. So. I mean, you fired Lovie Smith because he went 12-6, and then you did what? You had one good year since he left with Matt Nagy, and that was a fluky year. And then you got, you lost in the wild card game, right? So it's just kind of like, you kind of miss those days where Lovie's down year was 9-7, don't you? If you're a Bears fan right now, like I kind of think you might.
I'll tell you who doesn't miss him now though is the University of Illinois. So.
That's true. No, yeah. but again. NFL-wise, I think Lovie was the more successful head coach in my opinion. But I also think he earned it more. I think the only reason Bill O'Brien got the chance with the Texans is not because of him, but because of Bill Belichick. Like that's just what I believe. I'll always believe that. It's the only reason he got the job at Penn State. Right? Because the Penn State job came because of Bill Belichick. I don't think he'd done anything. I mean, he'd been at Maryland. Okay, they had some decent years under Ralph Friedgen. But then he goes to the Penn State and, doesn't do a whole lot. Like, is anyone – oh, yeah, sanctions and all. And when he had 4-7-5 at Penn State, it's not exactly – and then that got him the Texans job. Well, I'll ask you this, Ryan. If he would have coached the number of years he did in the NFL for the Browns and then got the Penn State job, is he the Texans head coach? After 2 years of Penn State going 7-5 and 8-4, do you think? Is Ryan frozen again? I think Ryan's frozen again. I thought he was very contemplative of the question that I asked him, but he's apparently frozen again. So I think that's how good my question was. Is it just froze Ryan? Completely froze Ryan. So we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and move on. But yeah, I think that Bill O'Brien has failed up more. I have very little respect for Bill O'Brien at this point in time. So that's how, man, my question was so good that Ryan's computer whole thing shut down. That's how you know you're bringing the heat is when that happens. But y'all don't know Ryan like I do. So what y'all don't know is he's not going to find that funny. He's going to be mad. So if things don't go perfect, Ryan, which I like about him, Ryan gets upset. Nicholas Grosh with a question says, you guys have taught me more about football listening to you, any TV analyst, and I am sure my fellow IBers would be willing to pay for an expanded version of Football 101. Okay. Well, Nicholas, I will say this. We're eventually going to get the technology good enough, and I'm already working on some things right now that are going to be we're going to do some videos that are going to be for message board members only. I just don't want to talk too much about it because I've already done too much of that in my 3 years. There's times where I'm like, I had great intentions, but I just couldn't carry it out because we just weren't where we needed to get to. So I'm not going to make those promises anymore other than just we're working on it. We will get there. I just don't know when. But yes, we're going to do some more stuff like that. But look, we can build that stuff into what we're already doing. And then, we'll hold that stuff in our message board and you'll be able to look at it all there. Ryan, the point that I made on the previous question was essentially, if Bill O'Brien was with the Browns in the NFL and then went to Penn State, went 7-5 and 8-4, is he getting hired by the Houston Texans as the head coach? I don't think that he is. It's because he coached Bill Belichick that got him that job, in my opinion, which is how Matt Patricia got a job. It's how Josh McDaniels got a job. It's always that, right?
Unlike those other guys, though, I mean, Bill O'Brien, I still maintain that Bill O'Brien did a pretty good job at Houston before he got very narcissistic, though.
It's not what I'm saying, though. My point is he doesn't get that job if it's not for Bill Belichick, whereas Lovey got the job with the Bears because of the job he did as the defensive coordinator.
I mean, it's all about who you know, though, all the time, really. I mean, yeah.
So, to me, I'd say Bill O'Brien failed up more, in my opinion. But again, you look at the records and Bill O'Brien's record and success with Houston was not as good as what Lovey did with the Bears.
I think the failed up thing just throws me off a little bit because because in my mind, right, it's like, okay, failed up. The most recent fail up, right, is that Bill O'Brien was an okay but not great offensive coordinator in Alabama. He gets promoted to be the offensive coordinator of an NFL team, right? Lovie Smith was a bad head coach for the University of Illinois, gets fired, and then becomes the head coach of an NFL team. Like
which is a dumpster fire of an organization at this point. It is
100%.
It's embarrassing.
Nobody can argue against that.
I get that point, but I think part of what the thing with Lovey is let's be honest. There's other reasons that they hired Lovey other than what he did at University of Illinois.
And it's the same reason that they hired the person before him.
We'll just leave it at that, and that's why they're a bad organization because it's just stupid. Anyway, but the point is that if you look at Lovey's track record, Lovey went to the NFC Championship game 3 times in 9 years. Bill O'Brien was at Houston for 7 years, and he never did it once. The furthest he got was 2 divisional games. And so that's the thing with me is Lovey had success as a coach in the postseason. Now, here's the other thing too: is Lovey was pretty bad with Tampa Bay as well. And to your point, it wasn't just that he did bad at Illinois; he didn't do a very good job in Tampa Bay either.
I forgot that he was at Tampa Bay. To be honest,
yeah. So they both are still kind of living off the past. But I just felt like Lovey did more to earn that than Bill O'Brien did. Is kind of my point.
Someone said Cliff Kingsbury in the chat, which is
my gosh, I still don't get that one. Who here is shocked that Cliff Kingsbury didn't make as an NFL coach? Raise your hand. No one? Any takers? No one? I didn't think so.
I don't think the guy ever won 8 games in a season during his college.
He had career. Pat Mahomes and couldn't have a winning record in college.
Wild.
So, yeah, ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. There's just this is what I say, like the NFL, part of the reason I don't like the NFL, there's just so many people that are this guy I used to listen to on the radio all the time. He had this expression, there's a lot of people educated far beyond their intelligence level. And I so think that's true. There's so many people that are in positions of power that are there because of accomplishments not related to that job. So I make a lot of money in this field. It allows me to buy an NFL franchise. And now I think I know what I'm doing to run an NFL franchise. I'm like, no, you don't. And that's what I always loved about Pat Bowlen as an owner. Why he was such a legend in Denver is because Pat Bowlen knows I know how to run a business. I know how to make a business profitable, and I'm going to do that in Denver. And you know how I'm going to do it? By hiring people that are good at this specific entity to run the day-to-day. And the only time Pat Bowlen got involved in those things is when, like, Dan Reeves wants to try to trade John Elway. He's like, no, we're not doing that. If it comes down to you or John Elway, you're losing that battle 10 out of 10 times, buddy. You know what I mean?
Reeves. Poor
but
Dan Reeves.
The point is for me, it's you got to know your lane. And there's so many bad, poorly run franchises in the NFL that just makes it hard to just enjoy it, to be honest with you. And they're so bad at evaluating quarterbacks, which is such an important thing. I mean, right. The drop off in quarterback play after the top the 5 or 6 is so bad. It just makes it unwatchable. It just does. And I'm sitting there watching Skylar Thompson and Tyler Huntley and Brock Purdy's going to the freaking NFC Championship game.
Hey man,
how does that happen?
Football. He's playing good football
but he's
right
Brock
now.
Purdy. You know what I mean? And then I got to go look at the NFC, and I'm like, AFC, and you're like, dude, good quarterbacks are getting knocked out every week because it's Joe Burrow versus Josh Allen. Well, Josh Allen's not good because he keeps losing to this guy. I'm like, yeah, he's losing to phenomenal players. So if we're both elite quarterbacks and your roster's better than my roster, like, here's the thing. Oh, Joe Burrow's better than Josh Allen. Maybe. I don't watch enough of them to get in that conversation. But here's the thing. Let's flip teams and see who the better quarterback is. Let's switch give Josh Allen, like, Stephon Diggs is very good, but give him Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon. Dude's throwing to Cole Beasley, for Pete's sake. You know what I mean? Like, Gabriel Davis. He's turned Gabriel Davis into an impact player in the NFL. He's not. It's more about the quarterback. It's like the three amigos. Name me one of the three amigos for Denver that did anything other than when they were with John Elway.
Ricky Nattiel? He was fantastic, man.
No, he went to Tampa Bay and was out of the league. Right? Mark Jackson goes to the Giants. Vance Johnson twice tried to leave and came running back to Denver because he couldn't make it with Dan Marino and then with the Vikings. And so to me, it's just kind of like, when you've got two great quarterbacks, it's about the talent around them. Well, then you look at the NFC and you're like, none of these teams have good quarterbacks. And it just makes it hard to watch. I mean, Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback in the NFC. Is that true? I mean, would you say that's accurate this year, Ryan?
He probably had the best season this year. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Trying to think. I mean, because Brady had a down year. Matt Stafford got hurt midseason.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of
Dak Prescott. You know,
Dak is so overrated, man.
But then look at the AFC.
Yeah.
And he's not in the top 5. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, it just makes it better.
Yeah, the AFC's bonkers, man.
Yeah.
The AFC is bonkers right now.
And then
Quarterbacks.
the question I had earlier about, would you watch the Broncos if they get Sean Payton? I'm like, why? I think Sean Payton's an overrated coach with an old rundown quarterback. Yeah. So why would I want to watch that? And you're giving up a lot of capital for those two guys, and you're paying Russell Wilson a lot of money for those two guys.
You know who had a really good year in the NFC this year? Geno Smith was a baller this year, man. He threw 30 tutties.
But then he gets into the playoffs, and he looks like
everybody knew that Seattle team was a farce. There's no way they were going to do anything in the playoffs.
Right. Exactly. All right, let's get down to some more here. We have some good questions today. Keita says, despite Clark Lee's lack of high-level recruiting, do you think he maximized the talent he had to the best of his ability? I would say no. 1 year he did, I would say the 18 team. But that was – look, no offense to Clark Lee, but it's the further away he got from Mike Elko's tenure, the worse his defense has got. 18 was his best defense, 19 was the second best defense, and 20 was his third best defense. They got progressively worse each year. Would you say that's accurate?
Yep.
Part of that's talent, but you're responsible for recruiting the talent. And he made a lot of mistakes, in my opinion. Like, hey, let's not look at Clark Phillips because he's not long enough.
Oof.
What would the Notre Dame cornerback depth chart look like the last couple of years if they had Clark Phillips on the roster? What would that 2020 playoff team have looked like if they had Clark Phillips on the roster?
Ugh,
you know?
Man.
So, yeah. He just had a lot of those.
He might go in the first round this year, Clark Phillips. Good
And if
player,
he was
man.
6 feet tall, he'd be an even higher pick. But to
He'd
the
be a
point
top-
is,
he'd be a
you've
top
got
10
to
pick.
you've got to be able to look past that, especially in college, and say, yeah, I realize he's not as long as we want. Ohio State made a similar mistake. Ohio State kind of dropped him. But, but look who they were run by. It was a mistake. And I think Coach Lee got too much into that, but still did a good job. I don't want to bash him like he wasn't good, but, he's to me, he's a tad overrated by people at Notre Dame, fans, about how good of he is. I think he built a lot of success off what was recruited for him and the foundation that Mike Elko laid. That's my stance on that. Let's wrap up and get through some of these deals here. All right. Tommy Gunn says, for the chat, sometimes I struggle over the choice between wearing ND gear or IB gear. Does anyone else suffer from this choice? Not me. I always pick IB gear, but that's because, I want to represent the company. But I do like the fact that you have that. I do appreciate that, Tommy Guns, very, very much.
Yes.
Irish Blooded says, what do you expect in the screen game with the receiver group this year versus last? And do you think this is substantial change in the types depending on the quarterback? I think the last part is more there. I think the talent of receiver is not going to be any different than it was last year. It'll be basically the same guys, but some additions. That's more of a quarterback issue than it is anything else, right?
Well, I think you're going to build a lot of screen game and RPO game off of different runs too this year. If it's Sam Hartman, right? I mean, why would you not, right? Like some nice bubbles, stops. Like there's a lot of things that you can do off of the run game action because it's not defending, but like Tyler Buckner, maybe you'll just have more quarterback read action off of it comparative to an RPO game. But Sam Hartman's not. Sam Hartman's probably a 4.8 something 40.
Ryan, he can pull it on a 3rd and 3 and take it out the backside for a first down.
But he's not.
You're not running quarterback counter with him the way you were in the bowl game with Tyler Buckner. You're not on the goal line. You're not calling that kick out play draw with Sam Hartman the way you are Tyler Buckner. Exactly using that game as an example. There's things he can do with his legs. He's not a stiff by any stretch. He had 11 rushing touchdowns 2 years ago, but he's more of a take what's there. You're gonna maximize his ability with the RPOs and him using his arm, not his legs. To your point,
exactly.
I would also say that the running back screen game should take a bigger jump this year, more so than the receiver, because Drew Pine just wasn't good at throwing him running back screens. I think Sam Hartman will probably be better there, and I think more spread out makes the running back screens more effective. Let's get through those because I know Ryan has to get out of here soon. Milton Fan says, are there any players that are playing a position that is not ideal for their skill sets? Not anymore. I don't think. You could argue because once Jaden Thomas got moved more inside, that was more suited to his skill set. I don't think any of the linemen are, none of the backs. Chris Tyree, we talked about not position, but how he was used within that position. I don't think there's anybody playing a position that's not suited for their skill set. I think sometimes their usage within the position is not necessarily for that, in my opinion.
I think a more interesting way to look at this question is there a player that might be suited for a different position better? Doesn't necessarily mean that they don't fit. Because I think of like Howard Cross, right? Like, would Howard Cross be more impactful as a 3 comparative to a nose? Right. I think we could have that conversation.
Well, and we've had this conversation about Clarence Lewis, right? I think that but that's more of how he's used. Like, I think Clarence, I've said this yesterday or the other day when I was on with Malik and Sean on Lucky Lefty, and Malik was like nodding in agreement. Like in Bob Diaco's defense, Clarence Lewis would be a pretty good corner because he's cover 2, cover 4. He can do that stuff really well. He's not a good corner in this defense. So again, it's not that he's not playing a position he couldn't be good at. It's he's playing a position that he's not suited for and how they use that position, which I think he could be much better for safety. So that'd be the one that I would probably say mostly would be the one example I would give, Ryan, is that one.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
All right, we'll get the last couple Irish Blooded. I know we're talking about offense today, but what are your early thoughts on the offer for the Urlacher kid and would keep him at safety? Would you keep him at safety? I haven't watched him yet, Ryan, so this is all you.
Yeah, I watched him. I actually watched a little bit of him a couple days ago, but I watched more of him in depthly yesterday, and I actually put my thoughts on the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com last night. Kennedy Urlacher, safety out of Chandler High School in the state of Arizona, son of Brian Urlacher, 6 foot, 6'1", listed, 180 something pounds. I saw the size and I was kind of like, oh, this kid's probably going to be a cover guy. The first few plays, I'm like, oh, my guy comes downhill with force, man. I'm like, yeesh. But then you look further into kind of some of the highlights, and he's a pretty nice mover. I think he's got really nice linear speed. Like, he's pretty explosive, but his foot quickness was relatively good as well. He's played a little bit of inside at the slot, but he's played mostly from the roof. I think that he's a really physical player who's got some decent movement skills. So I think that there's some intrigue there, right? And obviously they just offered him. We'll see what happens, in the future. I talked to him last night, and he was talking to me a little bit about visiting and doing all that type of stuff and, trying to get up to South Bend. But he told me literally when he got the offer that he was shaking when Marcus Freeman extended the offer to them. So I think it's
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's impactful, I think. And I think that he's a very physical, tough kid who plays at a good school, obviously at Chandler in the state of Arizona. So very interesting offer.
Yeah, it is one of the best schools in the state. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. And look, Ryan, we've talked about this. We want to see them getting more into Arizona, more and more and more and more. And look, they've recruited a kid out of the Chandler area, different high school, but the last time Notre Dame got a DB out of Chandler was Cole Luke, and he turned out to be a good player at Notre Dame and should have been even better coaching. Yep. But even then, he was still a good football player at Notre Dame during his career.
We've seen a couple offers in Arizona. Obviously, Jeremiah Newcomb is a new player on the board that I think Notre Dame is pretty high on. And Jackson Jones is good, man. I like that kid.
He is. He is. Did you guys talk about him in your underrated show? I think
no,
you didn't.
No, I wanted to get to him, but no, he did not.
But he's committed somewhere else as part of it too. But he's part of that as well. Lance Hab. Last night, Vince said he'd give Fox a hometown discount to have Brady Quinn in the booth. Would you take a slightly lower deal? They compared $70 million to $55 million if you could get Brady Quinn in the booth. No, I'm not giving up $15 million to get Brady Quinn in the booth. I'm sorry.
Come on, Vince.
To me, it would be, I would basically say, hey, look, we'll go to NBC, and then whatever the buyout is for Brady Quinn, we'll pay that. But I don't know. But again, I think Brady Quinn would do a good job there, but I don't think you need Brady Quinn in the booth to have a great broadcast. I'd say give me the best deal you can get. I care more about the quality of the production more than I care about the play-by-play guy or the color guy, which would Brady. I think the problem with NBC is like I could deal with Jason Garrett and Jack Collinsworth if the production was better, if the pregame show was better, the halftime show was better, the camera angles were better. Like even when Mike Tirico was doing games, I still thought the production sucked. Right? That's what I care more about. I think Fox does a really good job with the production of their games. Then when you throw in Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson, it makes it even better. So I care more about that. But here's the thing, like if you're Fox, why would I need it would be stupid not to have Brady Quinn in the booth. Why would you need to give them a hometown discount? He already works for Fox. So like to me, I would say that should be part of your negotiation. I mean, why would Fox not want Brady Quinn in the booth? Right. The only reason that Brady Quinn wouldn't be doing games with Fox if Notre Dame went with Fox is if Brady Quinn didn't want to do Notre Dame games, which maybe, I don't know if Brady wants to do it or not. I have no clue, but maybe he's like, hey, I'd rather not do the games of my home team because I can't be impartial. I love Notre Dame too much. I don't know if I don't know if he'd feel that way. I'm just like throwing out something to think about. Who knows if he wants to do it or not? But I'd love to have Brady Quinn in the box. Don't get me wrong. It's just I'm not giving up $15 million to get him there. Right. A year to get him there. Maybe that first year, but I mean, no, I still wouldn't do that. Like, it would. And if Fox doesn't get that, Ryan, then maybe that's not an organization that is one you want to be with because they don't understand the value. It would make a lot of sense for me. But if you were to tell me that they were going that part of the negotiation was I want Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, be fine with that too. For me, it would be here's where I would take a bit of a discount is I'd say, hey, look, we'll take $5 million less a year if you give us Brady Quinn and Gus Johnson for our home games. Now that would be awesome. That would be, and that's not a shot on Joel Klatt. I think Joel Klatt is a very good
in the booth. Yeah,
he's very good in the booth, and they're a great tandem. Like they play off each other well. It's just more about, but it's still Brady Quinn. No offense, and I think Joel would get that. It's still Brady Quinn, and we're Notre Dame, but that'd be an awesome tandem for me. Like Gus Johnson and Brady Quinn oh my goodness, that would be fun. That would be fun. But again, the deal needs to be built on the quality of the production and the way you build up the production, not who's in the booth. That just
agree.
It really does not matter to me. I care about the production of the event. And here's the last one, Ryan. Yep. This is from Tyler Smith. Question for Irish Breakdown. If you could pick any two commentators for Notre Dame season, who would it be? I'd have to give it to Gus Johnson along with Mike Tirico. Would be electric. Now, that would not be a good team because those are two play-by-play guys.
Yes. You can have two play-by-play guys.
Right.
So I do like Tirico as a play-by-play guy.
He was very good at Notre Dame. He was the only guy. The only reason I'd listen to broadcasts in the last few years was because of Mike Tirico.
Yep.
But I couldn't stand listening. Even as bad as even Doug Flutie couldn't make Mike Tirico bad, you know. But give me either one of those guys, Ryan, and I'm good with play-by-play. I'm very good.
I like Gus. I mean, for a color guy, we already mentioned a couple. I like Mike Mayock still. I really do like Mike Mayock. I think he did a good job. So yeah,
because we're football nerds, and he spoke to football nerds, and I thought he did a great job. But look, this is why I said what I said earlier. I saw Tyler's question earlier, and that's why I would love Gus Johnson and Brady Quinn, because I'd get my Notre Dame fandom. The first dog that my wife and I had was named Brady, and who do you think he was named after? It's Brady Quinn.
Tom Brady. Tom Brady.
Fired. Dude's fired. I got a second opening, everybody. But in all seriousness, Ryan, though, but it was Brady Quinn. I'm a huge Brady Quinn fan. I would love it if Brady Quinn was doing games. And if he was doing it with somebody like Gus Johnson, oh my gosh, that'd be amazing.
Right.
But if it was just Gus and Joel, I'd be fine with that too. If you're going to take actual Fox productions, I wouldn't mind if you had to get a Notre Dame guy. I think Steve Berline's out there. Go hire Steve Berline. But you know who else I wouldn't mind is I think Paul Burmeister, if you're going to stay with NBC, I don't know why they don't put Paul Burmeister in as the play-by-play guy. He's way better than Jack Collinsworth. He's very good.
Yeah.
And whenever he's had to fill in for a game, he does a great job. So I don't understand why he didn't get more, just because it's a name. That's really what it boils down to. His last name's Collinsworth. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful, but we should all be able to see that nobody else with his resume is getting the Notre Dame job on NBC if they're not tied into someone that's a big name in the business. So It is what it is. Well, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you listen via podcast form, we would love a 5-star review. Sign up for the CFB Nation podcast as well. Also, check out our CFB Nation YouTube channel. And as always, sign up for the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.